Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the drafty drawing rooms and coal smudged alleyways of 1700s England, a place where the air itself was a suspect, and every chilly gust carried whispered threats of untimely illness. You're seated near a window, just cracked an inch. A breeze glides through, and suddenly a powdered wig trembles. Someone reaches for a shawl, another clutches their chest. People didn't just dislike drafts, they feared them deeply, to the bone. You probably won't survive this century, not because of plague or warfare, but because you forgot to close the door and let in a lethal puff of air. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere particularly breezy, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with a creak of floorboards in a narrow London townhouse. You feel the draft before you see it. It snakes through the gap beneath the parlor door, curling like invisible fog around your ankles. You tug your woolen shawl a little tighter and shuffle closer to the fireplace, though it spits out more soot than heat. Someone forgot to close the kitchen scullery door again. You'll have to have words. This is England in the 18th century. The fireplaces are tiny, the ceilings are high, the walls are thin, and heating is less of a science and more of a polite suggestion. The average Georgian home bleeds warmth the way a colander loses soup. And yet, for all the architectural reasons a chill might be expected, it's not just physical discomfort that drives your reaction, it's dread. You see, drafts are not mere inconveniences. They're the harbingers of everything, from a catching of the cold to a sudden case of gout, facial paralysis, or what polite society might call a nervous contagion. One rogue puff of air, and the day's plans are over. A walk canceled, a dinner delayed, a sudden fainting on the chaise longue. You wouldn't risk it. The parlor is where you receive guests, but even that is a drafty ordeal. Every time the door opens, a new gust disrupts the careful ecosystem of temperature and decency. You nod your head at your caller while mentally calculating how fast you can get them to sit down, out of the line of the air. There's an unspoken agreement not to linger near doorways or speak too long with the entryway uncovered. A good guest is one who steps quickly inside and helps you push the door firmly shut behind them. It's no wonder English manners became so precise. When death could ride in on a breeze, you made sure everyone followed the rules. No loitering in thresholds, no standing up too fast, lest the air hit you in a moment of vulnerability. The fireplace gurgles. You watch as the smoke fails to rise properly and instead billows into the room. Another day with a poorly drawing chimney. You'll have to summon someone with a bundle of twigs and an opinion to sort it out. But for now, you try to will warmth into your toes by sheer force of nostalgia for summers past or last year's Yule log. Outside, the streets aren't much better. The cobbles are damp, the Thames is cold, and then every carriage that rumbles by sends a puff of London's finest soot and chill down your spine. The city has its own drafts, great industrial ones that blow through alleys and over bridges like poorly trained phantoms. You keep your collar high and your steps brisk, better to look odd than ill. Inside, you've outfitted your rooms the best you can. Thick curtains around the bed, a folding screen in front of the door, heavy rugs you scored second hand from a country estate that believes slightly less in cleanliness and slightly more in warmth. Every item has been arranged to combat the unseen enemy, movement in the air. The belief that air, particularly moving air, is dangerous isn't uniquely English, but in 18th century England, it's practically doctrine. The humoral theory that your health relies on balancing bodily fluids like blood, phlegm, and bile is still deeply entrenched. And it turns out cold air is thought to stir up those fluids in rather unhelpful ways. You don't just get chilly, you become unbalanced. You catch a chill, and next comes fever, or catarrh, or the sort of bone deep pain that requires leeches and strong tea. Historians still argue whether this fear of drafts was more superstition or a rational reaction to living in homes with the insulation properties of a half closed umbrella. But whatever its roots, the fear was real, and it shaped every detail of Georgian domestic life, from clothing to conversation. There's a reason why everyone looks so bundled up in paintings. They were indoors, all the time. Even now, centuries later, you might know someone, a distant aunt perhaps, who insists on keeping the air out. She closes windows on sunny days and warns against sleeping with the fan on. Somewhere in her bones, Georgian England whispers its disapproval. You shift in your seat. The room creaks, a breeze flirts with the curtain, and just like that, your entire body tenses, hundreds of years of caution stirring beneath your flannel pajama top. You're not scared exactly, just aware. Now, imagine living with that every day. Drafts weren't just air, they were a threat, a presence, a ghost you could feel but not see. And tonight, we'll follow that ghost from chimney to sickbed, from teacup to tenement. But first, perhaps add another blanket. You shuffle from the parlor to the narrow hallway, your slippers thudding softly against the floorboards. There's a noticeable dip in temperature here, the hallway, of course, being the draft's favorite playground. You wrap your shawl tighter and instinctively glance upward at the transom window above the door. It's shut mercifully. You exhale. You'd rather risk suffocation than a cross current. Why? Because in the 1700s, drafts aren't just cold, they're chaos. They are the silent assassins of balance, not just personal comfort, but bodily equilibrium. You've grown up steeped in the teachings of humoral medicine, after all. It's the medical worldview that still, quite frustratingly, got a firm grip on your neighborhood physician. According to this charmingly unscientific belief system, the human body is governed by four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each of these corresponds to an element, a temperament, and, conveniently, a range of diseases: feeling tired, too much black bile, anxious, not enough blood, sneezy and congested, That's a phlegm thing. And guess what triggers that? Yep, cold air. So, when a draft sneaks in and grazes the back of your neck, it's not just unpleasant, it's a potential medical emergency. That gentle breeze could upset the balance of your humors and send you spiraling into an illness that requires bed rest, porridge, and maybe the cheerful application of heated glass cups along your spine. And so you avoid the draft as if it were a rabid dog. You tuck scarves into the neckline of your nightshirt. You wrap your head in a cloth before sleep. You line your bodice with rabbit fur because any exposed patch of skin could become the entry point for what physicians charmingly call miasma, bad air, diseased air, air with attitude. Even the most refined drawing rooms had their little rituals around avoiding this invisible menace. You'd visit your cousin in Bath, and the first thing she'd do, after hugging you hello, is rush to close the servants' corridor door, muttering something about the breeze from the scullery stair. You pretend not to mind, but inside you nod in agreement. It's simply polite to close the door. If you don't, someone could end up with dropsy. The upper classes take this very seriously. If you're rich enough, you might even own a draft screen, a glorious folding contraption set near the fireplace to block wayward gusts from reaching your delicate ankles. These screens are made of wood or sometimes silk and often painted with pastoral scenes that are far more peaceful than your current inner monologue. You sit by the fire, and the draft screen keeps the chill away. You sip tea, lukewarm because heaven forbid you drink something too hot and then get hit with cold air. That's a recipe for sudden death. Or hiccups. Hard to say which is worse. Physicians are often summoned to treat these draft related calamities. You might call Dr. Penrose, who wears gloves indoors and insists on sniffing the air before diagnosing you. He walks the perimeter of the room, makes a face, and pronounces that a breeze from the eastern corner has likely disturbed your liver. Do not, under any circumstances, he warns, sleep with the window ajar. You thank him profusely, hand over a few shillings, and swear off fresh air for a month. Historians still argue whether this obsession with avoiding drafts had any measurable health benefit. Some claim it was simply a matter of comfort. In a time before central heating, any breeze made you feel more vulnerable. Others believe the aversion became a sort of cultural performance, a way to show you were educated, health conscious, and had the leisure time to worry about such things. But whatever the logic, the fear is baked into your daily routine. You check the keyholes for cold air. You keep a fur muff on your lap, even indoors. You yell at your youngest son when he runs from room to room, leaving doors swinging open like some kind of wind happy anarchist. And it's not just you, everyone's doing it. There's a whole cottage industry of the items made to fight the breeze. Door snakes, little fabric tubes filled with sand, are tucked against thresholds. Wall tapestries serve double duty, both as decoration and insulation. Even the fashion changes to reflect the paranoia. Bodices are layered, breeches are thick, gloves never come off, even for indoor social calls. When you sit in church, you eye the open nave with suspicion. Someone near the back cracks a window for fresh air and you immediately pull your cloak tighter. Your neighbor coughs, and you make a mental note to visit the apothecary on your way home. Not for her. For you, prevention, after all, is everything. And yet, there's irony in the fact that many of the same people terrified of drafts also fill their homes with strong scents and thick smoke. Burning coal, candles, and pipe tobacco creates an atmosphere dense enough to chew. But that's preferable to what an open window might bring in: cold, chaos, and the sudden urge to faint dramatically into a fainting couch. The best physicians of the day warn that cold air shocks the system, that it disturbs the vital spirits. No one really knows what a vital spirit is, but it sounds like something you should keep undisturbed, preferably wrapped in muslin and tucked under 3 blankets. You trudge up the stairs and notice another drop in temperature. The upstairs hallway is always colder, less visited. You picture the invisible fingers of chill sliding under door frames, into nightgowns, under bedclothes. You shake off the thought and pull your dressing gown tighter. The wind howls softly outside. Inside, you're sealed like a ham. Still, as you snuff out a candle and ease into bed, you take a final glance at the shuttered window, just to be sure. Drafts may be invisible, but you're watching for them anyway. You wake up with your nightcap slightly askew and a peculiar chill crawling up one arm. Instinctively, you tug the blankets higher, annoyed but unsurprised. Even in bed, the threat of a draft is never far, and not just any draft, the sneaky sort that finds the tiniest crack in your chamber window and slips in like a cat with cold paws. You sit up slowly, feeling around the edges of your bedding. Every inch of your sleep attire has been chosen for its ability to seal you in like a human teapot: a flannel nightshirt that reaches your knees, woolen stockings held up with ribbons, and, of course, the cap. Not fashionable, but functional, keeping warmth from escaping through your scalp, which you've been told is a prime exit point for vital spirits. Even during rest, people in the 1700s wrapped themselves like burritos. Why? Because they believed that nighttime was when the body was most vulnerable to air disturbances. While you slept, your pores opened, your muscles relaxed, and if a breeze happened to pass over your chest, well, that was a surefire way to catch a chill that could progress into something deeply tragic, like weak nerves or a trembling constitution. In fact, there's an entire market of garments designed just for sleep, and none of them are what you'd call seductive. There's the bed jacket, an absurdly puffy thing worn over the nightgown to insulate the torso. There are hand knit mittens, fingerless of course, for turning the pages of a book by candlelight. Some even use foot warmers, ceramic bottles filled with hot water, nestled inside fleece wrappings and hugged like sleepy puppies. And then there are the bed curtains, heavy, thick, opaque, hung from posts or rails. They enclose your bed in a private, heat trapping chamber of velvet or worsted wool. These curtains don't just keep out drafts, they muffle sound, dim light, and quite possibly block your escape should the fireplace catch the drapes on fire. But hey, at least you'll be warm when you panic. The layered bed becomes your fortress, And it has to be, because outside of those blankets is a world teeming with ailments, waiting for the moment you get too bold and poke a toe out. Or worse, fall asleep with your shoulder exposed. That's practically begging for pleurisy. Still, sometimes you can't escape the chill. Maybe your servant forgot to bank the fire, or perhaps the wind outside shifted and is now jabbing directly at the east facing window of your room. You sigh and consider ringing the bell pull, but your maid's quarters are down the hall, a place colder than a tax collector's heart, and you feel mildly guilty. So you pull on your indoor slippers, drape yourself in your thickest wrapper, and waddle to the hearth like a disgruntled bear emerging mid hibernation. You stir the ashes, nothing but cinders. You toss in a few sticks from the wood basket, hoping not to wake the house. The fire sputters reluctantly, as if also afraid of the cold. You glance toward the window and see it, a small, almost imperceptible gap between the pane and the sash. The culprit. You shuffle forward, muttering your disapproval, and press a scrap of cloth into the crack. There, sealed, nothing shall pass. Your grandmother always warned you about sleeping near windows. Her sister once caught a draft while reading Psalms before bed and woke up with one eye swollen shut for 3 days. Was it an infection? Allergies? No one dared suggest anything other than the air got to her. Humoral logic doesn't stop at night. If anything, it intensifies. You dream in humors, you wake in imbalance, and you live in fear of the cold night air slipping through the slats in your shutter and upsetting your inner equilibrium. Historians still argue whether these layers of insulation were more about medicine or class signaling. Some believe the elaborate bedclothes and bedroom rituals were less about comfort and more about showing you had the leisure and income to sleep like a cocooned aristocrat. Others argue it was a survival tactic in homes where the only real source of warmth was a tiny fire and your own body heat. Either way, the result is the same. You are a burrito. A burrito who may or may not smell faintly of lavender sachets, coal dust, and fear. You finally slide back into bed, now that the fire has revived enough to cast a faint glow. You fluff the pillows, reposition your cap, and nestle beneath the curtains once more. The crack in the window has been dealt with. The cold banished, for now, but your body, ever alert, remains in a state of low-grade tension. You pull your knees in tighter just to be sure, every part of you tucked, swaddled, and swathed. Somewhere deep down, you believe, as does everyone around you, that this ritual keeps illnesses at bay. That if you manage to get through the night without shivering, you'll wake up healthy and whole. And maybe, just maybe, your digestion will work properly, your mood will stay even, and you'll avoid another visit from Dr. Penrose and his oddly damp stethoscope. As the fire crackles softly and the wind whistles against the outer walls, you fall asleep. Not because it's warm, but because you've done everything in your power to keep the cold at bay. The bed groans gently under your layered body. The curtains rustle faintly in the still air, and the night ticks onward, quiet, wrapped, and ever watchful for the tiniest breeze. The morning creeps in without ceremony. A dull gray light seeps through the narrow window, filtered through layers of curtain, lace, and accumulated soot. You blink slowly, nose peeking above the bed covers like a wary field mouse. You don't move much, not yet. Movement invites air, and air invites, well, let's not tempt fate before breakfast. You lie still, listening. There's a gentle clatter in the downstairs scullery. The cook's up, rattling pans and muttering to herself. Somewhere, water boils. You exhale through your nose and steel yourself. Time to face the enemy. You slide your feet onto the chilly floorboards and immediately regret not requesting a bed rug. Your slippers wait faithfully at your bedside, their woolen lining visibly pilled with years of service. You jam your feet inside and shuffle toward the dressing screen where the morning's ensemble awaits. Chemise, petticoats, stays, gown, fichu, and one particularly long knitted muffler that your aunt insisted you wear until Easter. But before any of that, you must make sure the bedroom is secure. You pass your hand along the frame of the window, checking for leaks. You peer under the door to see if any light, or worse, movement of air, betrays a breach. And then, the final ritual, you open the cupboard and remove a rolled length of cloth weighted with sand and dried beans, your so-made draft excluder. You wedge it snugly beneath the door. Only now may you begin your morning routine. You're not alone in these antics. Across England, entire households start their days with a similar wariness. You know this because you've seen the evidence, the clumsy contraptions of others, from door snakes to window sashes stuffed with rags, from servants who tuck hot bricks into their master's boots to housemaids who light fires in advance, not for warmth, but to drive off the chill, which is really just code for seal the house from death. One of the more curious anti draft measures gaining popularity in the 1700s is the portiere, a heavy curtain hung over a doorway, sometimes velvet, sometimes wool, always impractically thick and dangerously flammable. These grand swaths of fabric serve both aesthetic and defensive functions. When drawn across a door, they create a theatrical entrance and a cold air blockade. You sweep into the drawing room, carefully parting the portiere with a flourish that says, "Yes, I am aware I look like a stage magician." But your guests understand. They, too, are familiar with the rituals of containment. Every fireplace, it seems, has a twin defense system, a screen for shielding from gusts, and a fender to keep your feet warm and your skirts unscorched. The screen, in particular, is essential, not merely for warmth, but to prevent the dreaded back of the neck breeze. That one area, according to Georgian physicians, is the most dangerous part of the body to expose. It's like leaving your castle gate wide open during a siege. Some households even go so far as to build false walls, partitions meant to divide a room into smaller, warmer areas. They aren't really meant for privacy. They're meant to reduce the square footage the fire must heat and to minimize the air's ability to roam unchecked. You begin to understand why Georgian homes feel more like obstacle courses than livable spaces. Historians still argue whether these makeshift modifications were driven by necessity or obsession, On one hand, fuel is expensive. Wood and coal must be rationed. On the other, no amount of firewood can outmatch a persistent draft. So why not seal the place up like a tomb and be done with it? But let's not forget the comical side effects. Heavy portieres may block the breeze, but they also block visibility. People frequently walk into them. Children get tangled. Dogs get trapped. One particularly rotund uncle of yours once mistook a tapestry covered doorway for a hallway and spent 10 minutes lost in what turned out to be the laundry cupboard. Your own attempts at draft proofing have, at times, gone sideways. That one winter you stuffed your window frame with sheep's wool, well, it did keep the cold out, along with the air, the light, and your ability to breathe properly. Still, you consider it a modest success. You didn't catch a chill, and that's what matters. Of course, you can't seal everything. Keyholes remain an eternal vulnerability. That's why you've taken to hanging little squares of cloth over them at night, fastened with pins. It's fiddly work, and more than once you've stabbed your finger, but it's worth it. You've read pamphlets that suggest bad airs can snake their way through keyholes like invisible eels. Who needs that? Today, the weather is still and gray, perfect conditions for paranoia. A still air day is what your housekeeper calls it. It means no winds outside, which means any movement of air inside must be your own fault. The fireplace sucks lazily at the smoke, unwilling to draft properly. You light a second candle, not for warmth, but for company. Candles don't cause drafts. People do. It's at times like these that you notice the ridiculous lengths your household goes to in the name of stillness. The butler cracks open the parlor door just wide enough to enter sideways, closing it behind him as if sealing a vault. The maidservants learn to glide instead of stomp. Even the dog has been trained to lie on the draft rug by the back entrance, not because he's obedient, but because it's the warmest spot in the house. As you sit down to write a letter, you smile faintly at the absurdity of it all. This constant vigilance against the air, this little war fought with fabric, fire, and firm conviction. And yet, you do not relax. You hear a faint whistling sound, possibly wind passing the window latch, and your shoulder tenses. You glance at the portiere, still, the keyhole, covered. Your slippers, flannel lined, all seems well, and still, your skin prickles. The war against the draft never truly ends, but you're getting better at fighting it. The fire crackles drowsily in the hearth, as if it too is tired of fighting. You sit before it, warming your hands, palms facing the flame, fingers spread like a prayer. The room is dim, the air still, but you haven't let your guard down, not fully. That's the trick with 1700s English life. Comfort is always cautious, always conditional. You glance toward the hallway again. The portiere sways, ever so slightly. Not again. You rise with the resigned energy of someone who knows they are not imagining things. There's movement in the air. The draft has returned. But from where? You begin your silent investigation, past the fire screen, behind the armchair, around the desk legs, all your usual haunts. The air shifts softly near your stockinged ankles. There, just a whisper, brushing along the baseboard. You drop to a crouch, eyes narrowing, and then you see it. A gap in the wall paneling, thin as a thread, a fissure between boards, perhaps the result of the wood shrinking in the cold. It's so small you wouldn't notice unless you were kneeling with your nose 2 inches from the wainscoting, which is, of course, you now are. This is the part that no one likes to talk about, the walls themselves. Because here's the truth: most Georgian homes are not exactly fortresses of insulation. They're more like polite suggestions of shelter, built with speed, style, and occasional structural guesswork. These homes often allow the outside in, slowly, invisibly, with a draft. Back then, plaster was expensive. Proper sealing between floorboards and wall bases, optional. Insulation, never heard of her. Instead, air leaks in through gaps in the woodwork, under the cornices, or around the mismatched stones in the foundation. The result is a structure that breathes, which would be lovely if it weren't breathing frost. In grander houses, things aren't much better. Marble floors, while impressive, are often laid without subflooring. That means they suck warmth from your souls like hungry leeches. High ceilings allow what little heat exists to rise heroically out of reach, and those large Georgian windows, ah yes, the status symbols of the age, are spectacular at letting in light and equally spectacular at letting out heat. You try stuffing the wall crack with a scrap of paper. It flutters away with a sigh. Next, you roll up a stocking, which holds better. Not elegant, but effective. You'll tell the housemaid to sew a draft stopper later, or perhaps you'll ask the footman to push the armchair in front of it and pretend the arrangement is artistic. Even chimneys, the one thing meant to bring you heat, betray you. Unless they're expertly constructed, they often produce reverse drafts, where the air swoops down rather than up, bringing smoke, soot, and the outside chill directly into your lap. Some people install chimney boards during the warmer months, blocking unused fireplaces entirely. These boards are painted with pastoral scenes, deer prancing through meadows, or bucolic cottages framed in ivy, but their real purpose is to keep the sneaky summer drafts from spoiling your sitting room feng shui. In particularly fancy homes, you might find a Rumford fireplace, a newer, shallower design meant to reduce smoke and improve heat output. It's a marvel of its time, but only the very well informed and well funded bother with it. You, like most, live with the older models, those that wheeze and belch like asthmatic dragons and seem to pull in more air than they ever let out. Historians still debate whether this architectural draftiness was the result of climate underestimation, economic shortcuts, or sheer aesthetic obsession. Georgian England loved symmetry more than comfort. If a pair of French doors looked good on the blueprint, no one questioned what would happen when December hit. You pour yourself a cup of tea, the steam rising like a plume of optimism. It cools rapidly, naturally. The air in the room seems determined to devour every ounce of warmth, and so you drink it quickly, lips pursed against the too hot rim, and resolve to write a strongly worded letter to the carpenter. This time, you'll insist he checks for invisible breaches. You've heard him scoff at that phrase before, muttering something about old wives' tales. But you know better. You're not imagining the drafts. No one is. In fact, this culture of vigilance creates entire domestic behaviors that modern minds might find peculiar. You learn to place candles on low tables, not for lighting, but to reveal movement. A flicker in the flame tells you which direction the air is traveling. That way, you can trace the draft to its source, like a cozy Sherlock Holmes armed with beeswax and a firm sense of self preservation. You remember one particular evening at Lady Winthrop's manor. The candle trick saved the party. The guests were shivering, the soup had gone lukewarm, and morale was plummeting. Then a clever footman placed a taper by the window, saw it dancing sideways, and discovered a crack in the shutter frame. Crisis averted. Dessert served warm. Gratitude expressed via prolonged applause for the under butler. These moments teach you that fighting drafts isn't just about comfort, it's about control. In a world where disease lurks in every gust and medicine has yet to catch up, sealing the room gives you power, a small victory, a manageable corner of chaos. So you return to your fireside, secure in the knowledge that today, at least, you've bested the breeze. The room is calm. The candle glows steadily. Your feet are wrapped in a quilted coverlet you've named the shield. And while you sit there, listening to the pop and hiss of the hearth, you realize something. The fear of drafts isn't entirely irrational. Not in a world where illness comes easily, healing is expensive, and the air is full of both wonder and worry. You sip your now cooling tea. You shift your chair a few inches to the left, just to be safe, and then, at last, you relax. The wall is patched, the portiere is drawn, the air is still. Victory for today. Later that day, a visitor arrives. You hear the soft clip of hooves and the telltale creak of the gate. The bell rings, a modest single chime, and you immediately freeze mid-sip of broth. The door, the dreaded front door, it'll open just for a moment, but that moment will be enough. You rise, not with excitement to receive company, but with a tactical precision that would make a general proud. As the maid hurries down the stairs, you trail behind her like a shadow commander, whispering last-minute instructions. Close it quickly, you mutter, and wedge the portiere before the wind gets to the drawing room. There's a chill in the air already. You can feel it, or at least you think you do. Maybe it's just anticipation. Maybe it's that little tickle on the back of your neck that sends shivers sprinting down your spine. You know what's coming. The door opens, and like a villain in a cheap opera, the draft éterstiquant. It rushes forward like it's been waiting all morning for this precise cue. The velvet curtain billows ever so slightly. The candles shudder. The flame dips. Your nose twitches. In less than 3 seconds, the entire microclimate you've cultivated in the parlor begins to unravel. Your guest, bless her, doesn't notice. She's swept inside in her new pelisse and silk gloves, cheeks red from the cold, her voice bubbling with some anecdote about her husband's gout and the cat's reluctance to sit still. She thinks she's bringing liveliness to your afternoon. You're only thinking about the breeze. You wrap your shawl tighter and listen to her story with one ear, the other listening for movement in the air. This, you see, is the domestic dance of the 1700s, managing airflow while making polite conversation. Because for the educated Georgian householder, air is medicine or poison. There's very little in between. It all depends on whether it's still or moving. Enter the physicians. Doctors of the day, those powdered paragons of preventive care, are deeply invested in your ventilation habits, but don't expect agreement between them. One will tell you to sleep with your windows cracked, that cool air is invigorating. Another insists that even the faintest nighttime draft could trigger apoplexy or, heaven forbid, melancholia. The medical consensus is basically a duel fought with fan folded pamphlets and deeply judgmental glances. Your own family doctor, Dr. Thatcher, is particularly vocal. He warns sternly against airing out the house too soon after sunrise. The sun must touch the roof, Mrs. Everly, he insists, before any latch is lifted. You're not sure what difference 30 minutes makes, but the man wears a top hat 2 sizes too large and smells faintly of cloves, so you trust him. He's also fond of reminding you that even the healthiest woman may fall if struck by a rogue cross breeze. This phrase haunts you every time the pantry and front door happen to open at the same time. And yet, other physicians are starting to whisper heresy. Maybe air isn't the enemy. A few enlightenment minded medics are beginning to argue that stale air, trapped and recycled, is what truly causes illness. They speak cautiously of miasma and vapors, but frame them as problems of bad stillness, not motion. Historians still argue whether this shift in medical thought had a noticeable impact during the 1700s or if the draft fear held on until later centuries. Certainly in your house, the fear remains firm. When your guest coughs delicately into her handkerchief, your instincts kick in. Your eyes flicker to the window. Was it left unlatched? Did the maid open it while dusting? You excuse yourself mid-sentence and glide across the room, examining the casement. Closed, latched. You exhale. Back in your seat, you offer your guest a scone. She declines and sneezes instead. You consider moving your chair slightly farther away, not for fear of contagion necessarily. You just suspect she might have caught a draft, and you don't want it to catch you next. Even the language of the time reflects this paranoia. People don't say, I'm ill. They say, I caught a chill, or the air last night was unkind. A bad breeze is treated like a neighbor who means well but tends to knock over the tea set when visiting, and sometimes the breeze gets blamed for more serious ailments. People struck by facial palsy, likely Bell's palsy in modern terms, are often diagnosed with having lain in a draft. Others complain of locked limbs, aches, and fevers after sitting too near a window at supper. Then there's the issue of lung trouble, or weak chests, as doctors dare delicately put it. The lungs, being spongy and invisible, are among the most suspicious organs of the body in this era. You might be told to avoid laughing too hard, breathing too deeply, or walking briskly against the wind, all of which might disturb the lung fibers. If that sounds vague, it is. But you don't question it. You trust your doctor. And when you hear of Mrs. Cartwright, your neighbor, who let her daughter ride in a carriage with an open window, and now the poor girl has the vapors, well, you shut yours tighter. Your guest finishes her story. Something about the cat and a butter dish. You laugh politely, but your mind is already circling the edges of the room, checking the temperature. The air has settled again. The candles are steady. The portiere hangs limp once more. Whatever breach occurred has sealed itself, or perhaps your layers of drapery absorbed it. You make a mental note to have the underfootman inspect the entry hall again for gaps. Better to over-prepare. After all, the last time someone sneezed in this house, you ended up drinking mustard powder dissolved in warm beer for a week. Such was Dr. Thatcher's remedy. You never questioned it. Not out loud, anyway. The afternoon stretches on, as muted and gray as a faded tapestry. The tea has cooled, the guest has departed, and you're left alone with the gentle hiss of the hearth and the soft rustle of fabric settling in a now undisturbed room. The window panes gleam dimly with moisture, not frost yet, but a warning, the kind of chill that seeps in through materials that shouldn't be permeable and yet always are. You glance toward the tall sash window. It's a proud feature of the drawing room, a signal of Georgian elegance, all symmetry and grace. But you know better. Behind that elegant frame lies a fragile truth. Even the most beautiful windows in England are traitors. The English sash window, for all its architectural charm, is an open invitation for drafts. Built with sliding panes that move up and down using pulleys and counterweights, they are clever in design and awful in function when it comes to insulation. The gaps between the sash and the frame allow air to creep in like a gossip-loving ant, uninvited, persistent, and convinced of her own importance. Of course, people have devised ways to solve this. One method is sealing the sash entirely with a paste of wax and flour, an inconvenience that requires reheating the whole thing with a lamp, should you ever wish to open it again. Others stuff the cracks with scraps of cloth or even newspaper. You, personally, have opted for a combination of wool padding and polite denial. You walk over and press your hand to the glass. It's icy. You flinch. There it is again, that ticklish shiver at your wrist. Somewhere, somehow, air is entering, and so you examine the sill, squinting into corners, tracing the edges with your fingers. It's always a surprise where the leak shows up next. One day, it's the bottom rail. The next, it's that odd spot near the pulleys where the rope disappears into the frame. No one talks about how windows age like bad cheese, becoming increasingly unpredictable with each season. Back then, no one uses double glazing. The concept of air-sealed panels is as foreign as canned soup or reliable plumbing. A single sheet of uneven glass set into a wood frame that's been repainted too many times. That's the standard. And every year, the wood warps just a little more. Every storm drives a little more damp into the grain. which means every winter is a little colder, a little leakier, a little more personal. You remember when your cousin, over in Hampshire, had her sash windows replaced entirely. She was thrilled. No more mysterious morning chills, she wrote. You visited her the following spring and discovered the windows didn't open at all. They'd been sealed permanently, for safety, she said. You nodded and said nothing. That's one way to win the war, you suppose. Some homeowners, desperate to preserve elegance and fight off the cold, commission interior shutters, solid wooden panels that close over the windows from the inside, often in two parts, so you can still open the top to let in light. You'd like to install them too, but your joiner says it'll take months and cost enough to fund a small expedition to the West Indies. Historians still argue whether the sash window was a net architectural improvement. Some say it was a mark of progress, a way to control light and air without the outward swing of the old fashioned casement. Others insist it marked the beginning of England's long love affair with form over function, where aesthetics win and your feet freeze as a result. You retreat from the window and take a seat near the hearth again. The fire is burning low, and you nudge it with the poker, watching sparks jump like startled fleas. The warmth returns, faintly. It's all about proximity, after all. Move more than 3 feet from the fire, and you're basically outdoors. As a child, you used to play Find the Draft, a game your mother invented, though you suspect it was a veiled way to get you to do chores. She'd send you into each room with a candle stub and a piece of paper. Wherever the flame leaned or the paper fluttered, there was your enemy. You took it very seriously. At one point, you swore you could smell a draft coming before you even opened the door. You were probably right. You think back to the letters of the period, so many written complaints about an affliction of the windows or the troublesome breeze from the southern bay. One aristocrat famously blamed his decline into mental fog and shaking nerves on the refusal of his butler to close the shuttered casements promptly. Another wrote an entire sonnet comparing the air from his pantry to the breath of Charon's fairy, poetic, if nothing else. And yet, despite all this, window opening was still a thing, especially during illness. When someone fell sick, the question would arise, should we let in air? Some physicians recommended it. A cleansing breeze, they argued, might disperse the corrupt miasmas. Others were horrified by this idea, claiming it would only invite more humoral disarray. The debate could paralyze a household. On one side, those advocating fresh air; on the other, those who insisted that no soul ever healed from a chill taken at night. More than one family quarrel has been born from a cracked window and a cross breeze. You remember one particularly fraught dinner party where a guest opened a sash just before the soup course. The hostess fainted, a footman dropped a tureen, and the violinist had to be paid extra just to keep playing through the chaos. The guest was never invited back. Since then, you've kept a discreet latch on your own windows. Decorative but firm. Nothing opens unless you say so. The room quiets. You rise again to pull the drapes, feeling the slight pressure of the warm room as it presses against the colder air behind the fabric. The outside world stays out. For now, the sash doesn't rattle, the panes don't tremble, the gap is sealed, and in that stillness, you settle again. You've held the line against the glass invaders, until tomorrow at least. You don't even need to look at the clock. You know what time it is by the sequence of domestic rituals echoing through the house, the faint clink of china in the kitchen, the creak of the warming pan being slid between bed sheets upstairs, the low whump of coal being shoveled. It's late afternoon, edging into evening. The chill has settled in for the night, like an uninvited uncle, and so the household begins its gentle, habitual war of containment. And you head for the kitchen hearth, not because you're hungry, not yet, but because tea is calling, and more importantly, so is warmth. The kitchen in your home is paradoxically both the warmest and the most breezy room. Warm, thanks to the constantly burning range and bubbling pots. Breezy, because of the back door, always opening and shutting with a whack as servants shuffle in firewood, milk jugs, and scandalous bits of local gossip. You glide in, careful not to let your skirts brush against the fire irons. The floor is flagged stone, cold even in slippers, and the air hums with the scent of toasted bread, browned butter, and something faintly medicinal. Thyme, maybe. Or whatever your cook insists keeps the damp out of the bones. You settle into the low chair nearest the hearth, and already the heat is working its way up your ankles. The fire here doesn't need coaxing. It burns because it has to. But even now, you angle your chair strategically to avoid the invisible corridor of wind that snakes through from the larder to the scullery. You can feel it sometimes, brushing your skirt like a mischievous kitten. This is where the real battle against the cold plays out, with tea, toast, and tiny fires. Tea, in the 1700s, is no minor thing. It's a domestic anchor, a ritual, a mild stimulant, and a show of refinement all at once. You take it seriously. Boil the water once, not twice. Warm the pot, steep precisely, and always serve with something warm, a biscuit, a toasted slice of bread, or, if you're feeling lavish, a bit of syllabub left over from last night's pudding course. But let's not forget the logistics behind that comforting image. The fire had to be going all day to keep the kettle on the boil. The kitchen had to be navigated like a gauntlet, avoiding gusts from under the pantry door. And if someone left the coal bin open, well, you'll feel it before you see it. Tea isn't just comfort, it's a tool. It warms the body. It provides moisture in a dry room. It gives you a reason to clutch a warm porcelain cup, preferably with both hands, and pretend you're not watching your breath mist ever so slightly in the air. Your cook, Mrs. Humbert, bustles past with a tray of jam tarts. She nods at you, as she always does, and gestures vaguely toward the chimney with a furrowed brow. "Draw's good today," she says. You nod, grateful. A well-drawing chimney means smoke goes up, not out. It means the kitchen stays warm and breathable, not smoky and surly. You don't have the heart to tell her you've been checking it yourself all afternoon, watching the flame, listening to the sigh of air as it's pulled through. judging it the way a sommelier might sniff a glass of port. And when it comes to fireplaces, size matters, but not in the way you think. A Georgian fire isn't meant to be a roaring bonfire. It's small, controlled, positioned for maximum efficiency. The goal isn't to heat the whole room, heavens no. It's to heat you, and you alone, in the area immediately surrounding the hearth. Everything else, that's what shawls are for. Some households go further. You've heard of foot ovens, small metal boxes placed beneath the table, filled with embers to warm your toes during tea. Others use warming stones, wrapped in flannel, and passed from lap to lap like sacred relics. And there's always the brass bed warmer upstairs, swung like a pendulum through the sheets to banish the pre sleep shiver. Historians still argue whether these rituals of tea and toast were comfort seeking or necessity. Some say it was a way to break up the day, mark the passage of time in a world without central heating. Others claim it was about survival, a pause to generate warmth before the long hours of sitting still. Either way, there's a rhythm to it now. You sip slowly, allowing the heat to trickle through your core like sunshine through fog. The toast is barely crisp, but that's intentional. Easier to chew, easier to digest, less likely to upset your humors. Because, yes, everything is still about balance. There's ginger in the tea. You detect it on your tongue. Spicy, warming. Cook probably added it without asking, a preventative measure. She knows you've been fussy about the air today. You smile faintly, forgiving her presumption. The fire pops, a tiny ember jumps out and dies instantly on the cold flagstone. You feel the drafts return, not from a window this time, but from the door to the garden. Someone left it ajar. You rise, quietly, no need to scold. The kitchen girl is new, still learning the rules. You gently push the door closed, feeling the suction of air behind you, the momentary resistance as indoor pressure reasserts itself. There, the breeze is gone. Just in time for the second cup, the ritual resumes. Tea, toast, warmth, not just sustenance, defense. Every bite and sip, a tiny protest against the encroaching cold, every fire, every crumb, a line in the sand. And so, fortified, you rise from your chair, smoothing your gown. The tea has done its job, the room is sealed, the hearth is loyal, and for the moment at least, you are warm. But the day isn't done. The bedrooms still need tending, the hallways still groan. The cold, ever patient, still waits for you in the spaces between the stairs. The light fades in layers, like peeling wallpaper. Sunset in England isn't dramatic, it just sort of withdraws. One moment, the windows offer a view of the garden hedges. The next, they reflect only the room's own candlelit version of itself. You watch the shift from the stair landing, hand resting on the polished rail, eyes scanning for flickers, movement in the curtains, a shimmer on the candle flame. Your nightly reconnaissance begins. Upstairs is colder, always has been. Heat, like a mischievous pet, prefers to hover low. It rarely climbs, and when it does, It's chased back down by the relentless drafts that haunt the stairwells and corridors. You take a step carefully, feeling the change in temperature as you rise, 1 degree cooler with every creak of polished oak. The hallway is dim. There's a candle waiting on the bracket shelf, its flame stoic and unwavering, a good sign. Still, you quicken your steps. The back bedroom has a reputation. People say you can't catch a cold, but you know better. You've slept in that room. You've felt the curse of it. This is where the family keeps the guest bed. It's nicely appointed, embroidered pillows, a warming pan, a view of the orchard, but it also happens to face north. The wind comes in from the moors, finds its way between the eaves, and launches such surprise attacks just above the skirting board. Visitors are warned, but still, someone always forgets to place the draft pillow, and by morning, their joints have stiffened like overworked hinges. Tonight, it's your turn to inspect. You open the door and immediately wince. The air hits you like an insult. It's not freezing, but it's moving. There's motion in the room. You can feel it, coiling low like a bored cat brushing against your ankles. You hurry across to the bed and check the curtains. Drawn. Good. Then the fireplace. Cold, but at least the flue is closed. Then the window. Ah, there it is. The left hitter hasn't sealed properly. The frame has warped slightly again, just as it did last February. You press it shut and jam a bit of wadded cloth into the crack. Not elegant, but effective. Then the final step, the bed. Beds, in 1700s England, are not merely where one sleeps. They are fortresses, thrones, hideouts, and for some unlucky souls, deathbeds. A proper bed is a massive carved thing, often more elaborate than the house it occupies. Yours is no exception. 4 posters rise like tree trunks, supporting a thick canopy draped in heavy fabric to block out drafts, light, and sound. It is warm in there. It is safe. It is, quite possibly, the only genuinely draft-proof space in the entire house. But getting into it is a process. First, the warming pan. A brass disc on a long handle filled with glowing embers from the kitchen hearth. You swish it between the sheets with a slow, circular motion, not too long in one place or the linen will scorch. The metal clinks gently against the bed frame. The air grows richer, tinged with the earthy scent of coal and old cloth. Then you fluff the pillows, already heated by proximity to the hearth wall. You inspect the bed curtains for gaps, tuck them in at the corners, and check the corners of the mattress for signs of damp. One does not simply dive into bed. One prepares it, like a ceremony. And finally, you address the sheets themselves. Most English households layer their beds like lasagna: mattress, feather bed, lower sheet, upper sheet, woolen blanket, quilt, counterpane. You fold them back halfway, testing each for warmth. Your hands, despite the gloves, feel like marble, and when you slide in at last, carefully, slowly, with the sound of creaking wood and whispering linen, you let out the faintest sigh. Not of pleasure, of relief. It's warm. It's sealed. The air is still. Historians still argue whether the elaborate ritual of bedding down was born from comfort or fear. Some believe the layering and closures served purely practical ends. Others suggest it was part of a broader cultural mindset, a desire to create microcosms of safety in a world filled with uncertainty. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. You lie still, you listen, you watch the curtains sway ever so gently, hopefully from your own breath and nothing more. Some nights you lie with your head beneath the covers, breathing hot linen, convinced that the moment you expose your nose, a rogue draft will zip in and nestle somewhere deep in your sinuses. You've heard stories, people who woke up with one side of their face frozen, who slept with the window open and caught the lumbago. Even if modern science might one day dispute these stories, tonight they feel true. And so you wrap yourself in ritual and fabric. You tuck the corner of the quilt beneath your chin. You draw the bed curtains completely closed. You position your feet far from the footboard, where cold likes to collect like coins in a basin. You settle. You do not move. The breeze cannot find you here. Downstairs, you hear the muffled thud of the front door bolting for the night. Somewhere, a shutter rattles. A late gust of wind, perhaps, or just the house creaking with age. You don't care. You are safe. And just before sleep claims you, a final thought lingers, half caution, half comfort. Tomorrow you'll check the guest room again, just in case. The next morning you rise before the sun, not out of enthusiasm, mind you, but because your left foot has developed an unsettling chill, despite your very best efforts at containment. It has slipped just slightly out from beneath the protective canopy of wool and linen, and now throbs with a silent accusation. You let the draft in. You sigh deeply. The quilt has shifted, possibly during one of your more dramatic dreams involving runaway stagecoaches and a disagreement with a baker over currant buns. Regardless, the equilibrium has been disturbed. And so begins another day. You sit up slowly, patting your nightcap into position. The bed curtains part with a dry swish. The air outside the cocoon is sharp, not unbearable, but enough to remind you why you'd sealed yourself inside with all the ceremony of a medieval knight donning armor. You swing your feet onto the rug and shuffle to the fireplace, which last night's embers have surrendered to cold ash. No matter. You ring the bell pull and wrap your dressing gown tighter around your shoulders, hunching forward slightly like a tortoise testing the temperature of its shell. A knock. Then the door creaks open, only halfway and blessedly slowly. Your maid, Agnes, has learned no gusts, no sudden temperature shocks. She's carrying a small basket of kindling and a box of spills. You nod in approval. Bit of a draft in the west corridor, ma'am, she whispers, like she's discussing an unwanted suitor. You nod again. Of course there is. There's always a draft in the west corridor. The wainscoting separates from the plaster by a fraction of an inch, and suddenly every passing breeze decides it's a shortcut to the stairwell. You make a note to request more felt padding for the hallway skirting. Again, Agnes sets to work rebuilding the fire. She's quick, practiced, a symphony of clinks, scrapes, and the quiet crinkle of paper used as a firelighter. Soon the soft crackle of flame reaches your ears. It's a small thing, but it means the difference between stiff fingers and pleasant correspondence. While she works, you turn your attention to the walls. Yes, the walls again, because if there's anything colder than a loose window sash, it's the breath of air that leaks through the very bones of your home, through panel seams and cornice cracks, between the ceiling joists and the corner joints. These are the drafts in the walls, the ones no one ever talks about, because acknowledging them would mean admitting that your entire house is subtly betraying you, and the older the house, the more it whispers. Georgian homes, for all their symmetry and poise, were never built with insulation in mind. The fashionable rooms have high ceilings, minimal wall hangings, and single pane windows that weep condensation if you so much as look at them sternly. Behind the plaster, if it's even plaster and not simply lime washed lath, there may be nothing but void, no padding, no wadding, just empty space and whatever creatures the walls have quietly invited to share in your heat. You once asked a joiner about filling in the gaps. He raised an eyebrow and suggested sheep's wool or crumpled newspaper. You nodded politely and changed the subject. Instead, you rely on tactics, thick tapestries, wall hangings, rows of bookshelves positioned just so, and furniture always placed with airflow in mind. There's a reason the writing desk is not under the window, and a reason the chaise faces the fire with its back firmly against the worst offending wall. Historians still debate whether the English obsession with wall hangings in the 1700s was decorative or defensive. Some argue it was pure style, an affectation imported from France or Italy. Others point out that those layers of fabric often coincided with the iciest rooms in the house. You tend to side with the latter. You have a tapestry in the upper hall that depicts a mildly disturbing hunting scene, mostly because it covers a crack between two beams that emits a wind you swear smells faintly of old lemons. Agnes finishes with the fire and begins to set your breakfast tray, porridge, toast, and a boiled egg with a slight lean, like it's had a rough night. You take it gratefully and settle into your chair near the hearth. Here, finally, you're warm. The wall behind you has been double draped. The hearth glows. Your slippers have been resting by the embers and feel like toasty clouds. You breathe in deeply, a mix of coal smoke, linen, and cinnamon. But even as you chew, your eyes flicker toward the wall again. You swear you heard it. That faint rustle, that whisper of shifting air. You lean forward, placing your hand flat against the wainscoting. Cold, colder than it should be. You press your cheek to the same spot. Still cold. You sit back, sighing. Draft in the wall, you mutter, to no one in particular. Agnes, who is pretending not to listen while dusting the mantel, offers a sympathetic nod. I'll see to it, ma'am. Maybe stuff the space behind the skirting with felt, like we did in the blue room. You nod. It's a temporary fix. They always are. But it's enough to restore the illusion of control. As she exits, careful to shut the door with the grace of a professional ballerina, you return to your porridge. The egg is cooling. The fire flickers. The air behind you is still, for now, but as every Georgian knows, the war is never over, not while your house still breathes. The parlor is prepared for callers, or as prepared as it can be, considering the constant threat posed by doorways. You've arranged everything meticulously. The fire is blazing politely, but not too energetically. The good tea service is out, and the portiere is drawn fully across the inner door. The chairs are angled to prevent drafts from reaching spines. One must think defensively when entertaining, and yet you can feel the tension rising as the hour nears. The draft is always most treacherous during social visits. Visitors mean open doors, coats flapping, breezes rushing in unannounced like party crashers with no sense of boundaries. It's a miracle anyone gets through a conversation without falling mildly ill. You seat yourself in the corner chair, not because it's the most comfortable, but because it has a solid wall behind it, and the corner has been triple rugged. A sort of personal fortress, albeit upholstered in brocade. Then, footsteps. The guest is announced, Mrs. Brimbleton, known for her punctuality, her alarming collection of medicinal tinctures, and, most problematically, her fondness for standing in doorways. You brace. The door opens. Not wide. The butler has been trained, but it doesn't matter. Mrs. Brimbleton pauses in the frame, like a debutante entering a ballroom. The air behind her rushes forward, bold and chill. You swear you see the curtain twitch. You rise, greet her warmly, and gesture her in. Do come and sit, you say, which is polite speak for heaven's sake, stop letting the air in. Oh, it's so nice in here, she coos, settling herself directly in front of the hearth. Much warmer than my place. The drawing room never quite holds heat, no matter how much I stuff the sash. You nod, sympathetic but alert. Her scarf is still half draped over her shoulder. You fight the urge to leap up and tuck it in. Instead, you offer tea. The maid enters with the tray, and for a terrifying moment, both the inner and outer parlor doors are open. The air does not drift, it barrels. The flame in the candle by the tea service bows low in protest. The maid fumbles with the latch and closes the door hastily, cheeks red. She knows. She knows what she's done. You don't glare. She's young, but you make a mental note to remind her about the sacred law of one door at a time. Mrs. Brimbleton takes her tea without sugar. You sip yours and listen dutifully to her story about a cousin who caught the influenza after stepping out in damp stockings. It was the draft from the chapel doors, she insists. Knocked her right down the steps. You nod sagely. Of course it was. In your world, it's understood. Cold air has agency. It does things. It creeps, surprises, conspires. It doesn't just inconvenience, it inflicts. And social calls are its favorite time to strike. The stakes are higher when you're hosting. The room's configuration is key. You keep your guests seated away from windows, facing slightly inward. Anyone who suggests opening a window, just a crack, is met with a gentle smile and an emergency diversion. Shall we have more cake? That usually works. You remember a visit last year when Mr. Pendlethorpe insisted the room felt stuffy. Before you could stop him, he had lifted the sash 2 inches, and within 20 minutes, half the party was clutching shawls, and Mrs. Armitage had developed what she described as a spasm behind the eye. You've never fully forgiven him. Historians still argue whether this hyper awareness of airflow during social engagements stemmed from health anxieties or a deeper cultural belief in controlling one's environment. Some suggest it mirrors Georgian ideals of social order. Just as behavior must remain proper, so too must the air remain still. Others propose it was about hospitality, the idea that a host must protect their guests not just from hunger or boredom, but from rogue weather systems within the drawing room. Either way, it's an exhausting responsibility. Mrs. Brimbleton has begun rummaging in her reticule. You brace, fearing she might produce a fan, but instead, she pulls out a small tin of lozenges. These are for the throat, she says. When the air goes sharp, I find it helps. You accept one politely. It tastes of licorice and chalk. She rises to examine the embroidery on your mantelpiece, which of course means she's heading toward the draft zone. You leap up delicately and guide her back to the chair with a compliment about her hat and a comment on the scones. A calculated maneuver she doesn't notice. By the end of the visit, you're quietly drenched in relief. No one fainted, no chills were caught. The portiere held. The candle flame remained upright. She departs with the same breezy cheer she entered with. You ensure the door is shut immediately behind her, and then, with the stealth of a thief, inspect the perimeter of the room. No detectable temperature change. Success. You flop into the corner chair, exhale, and stare at the dancing fire. It's not just about warmth, it's about vigilance, about preserving the sanctity of your space, your equilibrium, your carefully curated microclimate. Your guests may come and go as they please, but the air, you decide where it goes. The sun has dipped reluctantly beyond the hedgerows. The amber glow hour has passed, leaving your home bathed in candlelight and flickering fire shadows. A comfortable silence settles in, broken only by the occasional snap of the hearth and the rustle of coals shifting like lazy beetles in their bed of ash. And yet, somewhere in the house, a door has been left ajar. You know it before you know it. That instinct, honed over countless evenings and too many sneezes, sends a ripple down your spine. The temperature shifts, imperceptibly but unmistakably. You rise. This is no longer a drawing room matter. This is now a sick room emergency. You make your way upstairs, shawl tight, slippers muffled against the stair carpet. The house is quiet, unnervingly so. No clinking of dishes from the kitchen, no soft humming from the scullery maid. Just the occasional groan of old timber and the whisper of something moving, air likely. The ghost of a draft, waltzing unchecked. You reach the small bedroom at the far end of the corridor, the sick room, reserved for mild illness, convalescence, and the occasional bout of imagined melancholy. And here it is, the door, hanging open just wide enough for a shiver to pass through. Inside, the fire is out. The curtains are still drawn, The room dim. A lone candle sputters on the bedside table, dancing in frantic little jabs. It's the flame that gives it away. There's airflow here, movement, uninvited and unrepentant. You shut the door behind you, not quite slamming, but with sufficient force to communicate disapproval to the household ghosts. Then you examine the scene. No one is currently ill, thank heavens, but the room hasn't been prepared properly since last week's chill, not aired, not restoked, and now, clearly, not sealed. This is exactly how it begins, with casualness. A door left open, a window unlatched, a servant who thinks just for a moment that fresh air might do some good. You've heard this argument before. Enlightenment doctors, those progressive devils, have begun suggesting that rooms should be aired out when someone is sick. Let in oxygen, they say. Disperse the bad humors. It sounds logical, reasonable, even, and it's entirely terrifying because for every new thinker with a barometer and a theory, there are three elderly matrons who will tell you that opening a sick room window is the fastest route to death short of poison. You know one, Lady Hattingly. She opened a window during her nephew's fever, and, within a day, his complexion went blue. Was it the illness? The air? Historians still argue. Lady Hattingly doesn't. She hasn't opened a window since 1743. You set to work. First, you relight the fire with a careful hand, building it slowly, layering kindling like thin secrets. The warmth is sluggish but willing. You drag the foot warmer from under the bed and slip a hot stone inside. Then you close the bed curtains, tightly but not suffocatingly, and adjust the pillows with the practiced hand of someone who's read 4 different pamphlets on proper head elevation. And the door, oh, the door. It must remain shut at all costs, not simply to keep the chill out, but to hold in the air. This is one of the more peculiar beliefs that lingers. The idea that the air in a sick room carries not just illness, but identity, that it becomes charged with the patient's condition, their sweat, their breath, their imbalance. Letting it out into the hallway could infect the whole house. So instead, you trap it. You've heard stories of entire rooms being sealed for days. Curtains closed, windows fastened, doors opened only for brief moments while carrying in gruel or a clean nightshirt. The result? A smell like boiled onions and wool, but no breeze, no draft. And if the patient survived, it was taken as proof the air had been contained. Of course, others argue the opposite, that stale air kills. That sealing a sick room turns it into a box of rot. That ventilation is salvation. But you've also heard what happened to the Wilkins boy. One open window during measles, and he was gone before dawn. You prop the door with a rolled towel, an added barrier. You stuff a folded shawl along the windowsill, where a sliver of light suggests potential betrayal. The room is still, heavy, the kind of quiet that feels padded. You sit in the bedside chair for a moment, just to feel it, the peace, the quiet battle waged in cotton, wool, and stone. Historians still debate whether sickroom practices of the 1700s were based in empirical understanding or centuries of superstition and trial and error, likely both. There's no denying the effect of warmth, of quiet, of ritual, of not allowing breezes to poke at a vulnerable lung. There is a certain reverence to it even now. As you leave, you close the door with infinite care. Behind you, the air holds still, not just because of your efforts, but because you demanded it. You descend the stairs slowly, your candle casting long shadows on the paneling. The parlor awaits. The warmth beckons. You'll check the hallway shutters again on your way, just to be sure. No chill tonight. Not here. You pass through the lower hall, candle in hand, senses attuned to every creak, every shudder of wood or fabric that might indicate a breach in the domestic fortress. The fireplace in the sitting room is still going strong, a small mercy, but the hallway between here and the breakfast room has always been a troublemaker. The moment you step across the threshold, you feel it. Not a full breeze. No, that would be too obvious, too coarse, but a sly shift in the air, the faintest thread of movement across the back of your hand. It's the kind of sensation only someone trained by decades of draft warfare could detect. You pause, hold your breath, watch the flame of your candle. It bows slightly. There it is. The hallway draft, the oldest foe. You're not sure where it comes from anymore. The window has been painted shut for years. The skirting boards have been resealed twice, and the floor runner is nailed down so tightly it might as well be part of the architecture. And yet, the draft remains. You proceed carefully, feeling as though you're walking through an invisible stream. The air isn't cold exactly. It's restless, moving where it shouldn't, disobeying the rules. And here's the part no one likes to admit. Sometimes the draft smells. Not badly, not foul, just peculiar. Faintly sour, maybe, or slightly earthy, like the memory of a damp root cellar. You once tried to describe it to your doctor, who blinked and suggested it was psychosomatic. You've since considered whether he might be suffering from anosmia. This scent based paranoia isn't new either. In fact, in Georgian England, there's a peculiar theory. If it smells bad, it's safe. Yes, you heard that right. A lingering stink? Excellent. That means the air is still, that no outside currents are sweeping through. A room heavy with the scent of cabbage, sweat, or damp boots is considered, oddly, a protected space. But a room that smells like nothing at all? That's dangerous. That's suspicious. It means the wind is moving. The air is shifting. The defenses are down. In fact, many households light incense, not to purify the air, but to test it. If the smoke rises straight, all is well. If it curls sideways, a draft. If it dissipates suddenly, someone, somewhere, has cracked a door. You arrive at the breakfast room and check the usual suspects: the windowsill, the hearth, and the door frame. And there, tucked behind the curtain, is your culprit, the cat flap. Of course, the cook's tabby, an ill-tempered blob named Cobnut, has forced it open again in one of his midnight jaunts. A breeze snakes in through the cooked panel, subtle as a lie. You lean down and snap the flap back into place, then wedge a thick book against it. You'll deal with Cobnut later. He has no concept of public health. You stand and breathe deeply. The room smells faintly of toasted oats and old wood polish. A good sign. You extinguish the candle and stand in the dark for a moment, listening to the stillness settle once more. Historians still argue whether these scent based air beliefs were purely superstitious or grounded in some early, misunderstood version of airborne transmission. The miasma theory, that disease was carried on foul smelling air, was already circulating by this point. But it coexisted with older ideas that sweet air was suspect and still air was somehow loyal. Your grandmother used to say, a room should smell like it's lived in, or else the ghosts move freely. You used to laugh. Now, you check the scent of a room before trusting it. In some households, they hang dried herbs, rosemary, thyme, lavender, not only to perfume the space, but to gauge it. If the scent lingers, the air is contained. If it fades quickly, the draft has claimed the room. It's a poetic, if imprecise, system. You return to the parlor, where the firelight casts long shadows and the tea service glimmers gently, a place of safety, of stability. You sip the last of your lukewarm tea and consider lighting another taper just to monitor the room's air patterns while you read. But not yet. First, you walk the perimeter again, checking the baseboards, the curtains, the little pocket of space near the bookcase where cold sometimes pools like forgotten soup. All clear. You light a small lavender candle and place it on the mantel, not for the light, not even for the scent, but to watch. You glance at the tiny flame every few minutes, the way a mother checks a sleeping child. Still upright, no flicker, safe. And so you settle again into the chaise near the fire, book in lap, slippers properly aligned. You open the volume, Sermons by a Bishop who once declared that excessive exposure to early morning air leads to spiritual confusion. He was mocked in the journals, but privately you rather agree. The candle burns low, the air remains heavy with stillness. The smell is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, simply known, familiar. You sink into the chair, muscles softening, the fear of movement slowly ebbing. You've done the rounds. The doors are shut. The house is yours again. No draft, no scent of betrayal, no invisible whisper stirring the corners. Just fire, wool, and rest. You drifted into sleep for a moment there. Not quite a nap, more a polite disengagement from consciousness. The book rests awkwardly across your chest, your head lolls slightly, and a thin line of drool threatens the integrity of your fichu. You blink slowly, unsure of whether a minute or an hour has passed, and then your left eyebrow twitches. Air. Again. You're upright before your slippers even fully understand what's happening. There's a movement in the room, a gentle tug, a whisper across your cheek that makes the hairs on your arm lift, like loyal soldiers sensing incoming peril. You know this one. It's not the hallway, it's not the window, it's the mind draft. That's what you've started calling it. a chilling breeze that seems to defy architectural logic and instead seeks out the psyche. You may not feel it in your bones at first, but you feel it in your mood. A sudden slump, a distant sigh, a fogginess that settles just behind your eyes like a cloud waiting to break. The Georgians had another name for it: melancholia, a state of emotional bleakness, often attributed to imbalance, of humors, certainly, but also of air, yes, air. Specifically cool, moist, creeping air, the kind that slips under doors and into souls. You feel it now, not on your skin, but behind your ribs. You stand and pace the room once, twice, observing everything. The lavender candle still burns with a vertical flame. No visible flicker. The windows are sealed, the curtains unmoved, and yet the air has changed. The room has grown, thoughtful, heavy, like it knows a secret and refuses to share. You shake your head, attempting to rattle loose the haze. The phenomenon isn't unique to you. Diaries from the period mention it constantly: a waking gloom, a temperament of shadow. One woman described it as a mood born of the ceiling beams. Another blamed it on a cracked pane of glass through which the devil sent whispers. In polite company, these episodes are referred to as a delicate turn or a thoughtful spell. In less restrained circles, it's just called the room sadness, and it's always tied to drafts. Always. One 18th century physician, Dr. Basil Crimble, wrote extensively on the impact of ambient air currents on emotional well being. He claimed that the melancholic condition may be stirred by breezes which ruffle not the skin but the heart. His suggestion: sealing the room, covering reflective surfaces, and warming the feet. You do two of the three. The mirror is too heavy to drape again. You move to the sideboard and pour yourself a modest dram of warmed cordial, something thick, dark, slightly medicinal. It settles warmly in your stomach. The fog begins to lift, but the fear remains, because this kind of draft is hardest to catch. There's no whistling, no curtain flutter, no candle rebellion, just an inner coldness, like a damp blanket of thought. You return to the fire, wrap yourself in the thickest shawl you own, a monstrosity knit by your cousin from sheep that must have been part bear, and resume your perch. You set the book aside and simply watch. The fire, the candle, the silence. Historians still argue whether 1700s reports of draft induced sadness were actually early descriptions of depression, or whether they truly believed air could cause melancholy. Likely both. But when you feel it yourself, this invisible shift, this emotional draft, it's hard not to nod in agreement. The mind, after all, is part of the body, and the body lives in the air. You think of Mrs. Whitby, your neighbor down the lane, who insists her migraines are triggered by gusts that blow through the eaves. She's had the roof inspected 4 times. Nothing has been found, but her symptoms persist, always when the wind picks up, always when the house groans. You think of the man on the street corner who preaches softly to pigeons on cloudy days, the baker's son who stopped whistling after a week of cold mornings. And you wonder, not dramatically, not with fear, but with a sort of distant curiosity. Could a draft change a life? Certainly, it changes a moment. You're warmer now. The cordial has done its job. The shawl is stifling in the best possible way. You lay your head back and close your eyes just for a blink. The fire snaps contentedly, and the lavender candle has burned low, its puddle of wax reflecting the flame in miniature. You sigh, not heavily, just enough to affirm that you're still here, still wrapped, still safe. Some people believe the house breathes, that every home has its own rhythms, expansions and contractions, inhalations and exhalations. If so, perhaps tonight your house has simply sighed, nothing sinister, just tired, just a little out of balance. You whisper a thank you to the room, to the shawl, to the unseen forces you're always in quiet negotiation with, and let your body soften again. The draft is gone, or perhaps you've simply made peace with it. Evening deepens into night, and the house, if possible, grows quieter still, the sort of silence where every floorboard dares you to step, and every window pane sighs softly under the weight of settling temperature. You move slowly now, slippered feet whispering against the rugs as you begin what you think of as your nightly patrol. You don't call it that aloud, of course. That would sound a bit military. But make no mistake, the operation is strategic, thorough, measured, a final sweep to ensure the air stays where it belongs. You begin in the blue salon, a room no one has used since your aunt's card party last May. Still, it must be checked. The drapes remain drawn. The fire is laid but unlit. No need tonight. But you pause anyway and press your hand to the wall behind the sofa. As expected, it's cool, not cold, not threatening, but enough to warrant a discreet repositioning of the cushion that tends to slump and expose the corner seam. That done, you close the inner shutters, tug the velvet curtain straight, and carry on. Next stop, the vestibule. Here lies danger. The front door, though grand in design and in possession of a truly dramatic brass knocker, is your house's greatest liability. It shifts in the frame during storms. It leaks air through its carved detailing, and it never quite seals at the base. You've added draft excluders, of course. A thick, cylindrical cushion rests snugly at the foot like a faithful dog. But still, you open the inner vestibule door with reverence, like disturbing a sleeping monarch, and step inside. The chill is immediate. It's not just colder, it's different. It has intention. There's no wind, no howling, just that presence. The suggestion of air where air ought not be. You crouch to inspect the base of the outer door, the cushions shifted, cobnut again, perhaps. He likes to sprawl here, belly up, soaking in the coolness, like a lizard with deeply unwise preferences. You nudge the cushion back into place and place a heavy brass boot jack atop it for reinforcement. The vestibule settles. You wait, still as a church pew, watching the space. The air, defiant at first, begins to still. Historians still argue whether these kinds of household rituals, the stuffing, the wedging, the nightly passes, were neurotic compulsions or rational responses to a genuinely uncomfortable architectural era. but they miss the point entirely. This isn't compulsion, it's care. You aren't merely sealing rooms, you're maintaining an atmosphere, a climate of predictability, of safety, of intentional stillness. Back through the inner door, you latch it firmly and stand still for a moment, reacclimating to the warmer air. You sniff, a faint scent of coal smoke, floor wax, and orange peel. Good, nothing foreign. On to the final leg, the bedrooms. You start with the guest room, now reset after its recent encounter with a mischievous breeze. The shutters hold. The quilt is firm. The pillow lies smooth as a lake. You nod once and shut the door softly behind you. Next, the nursery. Though long unused, it remains a room deserving of vigilance. Children's rooms, you were once told, are the most sensitive to drafts and ghosts, your cousin had added, before being forcibly hushed by your grandmother. You inspect the corners for cold nothing. You pause by the doll's cradle, long empty, and adjust the blanket in any way. You do not speak here. The silence is heavier. You leave the door a crack open, not for airflow, of course, but for memory. And finally, your room. You've saved it for last, as always. You enter like a soldier returning from the front. The fire is low, but glowing. The sheets are folded back. The warming pan has done its work. You step in and close the door behind you, firmly, finally. But before you slip into bed, you perform the last, most personal ritual, the curtain check. You reach up and tug gently at each corner of the bed curtains. They must not gape. No cracks, no fluttering folds. You walk the perimeter slowly, inspecting the edges, ensuring the entire sleeping area remains a warm, draftless cocoon. Only then do you lift the covers, slide inside, and pull the drapes shut. The world outside disappears. Inside is warmth, stillness, faint firelight. The air no longer moves. Or if it does, it moves in rhythm with you, your breath, your pulse, your sighs. You lie still, and somewhere in the walls, the house exhales, not with menace, but with the groaning relief of old timbers settling. You listen, you wait, but the air is quiet. The drafts are held at bay, and sleep, like a blanket, begins to rise. When you wake, it's still dark, not the velvety kind of dark that feels full of sleep, but the slightly chalky gray that hints at morning waiting just out of reach. The coals in the hearth are cold. The air within your bed-curtained cocoon is still warm, but you can feel the outlines of the world beyond, colder, edgier, teetering on the brink of movement. You lie there for a long moment, listening. Nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere in the bowels of the house, a door. Not a loud slam, no one is being careless. It's the slow, deliberate closing of a door that didn't latch properly the first time. A thud, the sound of pressure shifting, and then, almost immediately, your curtains twitch. A cold chain reaction has begun. This is something every draft sensitive household knows intimately when one door opens or closes somewhere, a cellar, a scullery, a front entry. The entire balance of air throughout the house adjusts, like marbles shifting in a tilted bowl. One small disruption, can set off a domino effect of pressure differences. A gust under the dining room arch causes the library curtains to lift. A cracked pantry window whispers its icy mischief all the way up to the stairwell landing. You once read a tract that described the house as a set of lungs. Open a window, and the whole thing inhales. You throw back the covers gently, as if startling the air might provoke it. The floor is cold. Of course it is. The warming pan lost its magic hours ago. You shuffle toward the door, wrap draped over your shoulders like a cloak of minimal courage. You open the door slowly and immediately feel it, a thin stream of air brushing past your ankles. Headed toward the upper hall, it's happening again. You peer down the corridor. A light glows from the servants' stairs. Someone is about, possibly the boot boy fetching coal, possibly Agnes sneaking warm water to the still room. Innocent tasks, all. But when two doors open at once, even briefly, you get a cross draft. And cross drafts are the most feared variety of all. Historians still argue whether it was the wind itself or the collision of currents that truly terrified people. One breeze alone might be forgiven. Two opposing streams. That was a gateway to catastrophe. You recall a physician who once told your aunt that a draft across the chest from opposite directions confuses the spirit. When pressed for clarification, he mumbled something about nerves and changed the subject to barley tea. You descend the hall with purpose. The house groans a little underfoot, uncertain about your intentions. As you move, you feel the pattern. The air is clearly migrating toward the back of the house, sucked by the low pressure pocket someone's created in the kitchen corridor. You reach the stair landing and peek down. The pantry door stands ajar. There it is, the trigger. One small lapse, one pantry door left open to the chill. You descend quickly, barefoot fury muffled by carpet runners. You close the pantry door with finality. No drama, just the firm click of restored order. The cold air stops shifting. The house rebalances. You listen for the ripple effect. The upper hall stills. The parlor quiets. Even the dining room candle, which had begun to lean earlier, straightens its flame. The chain reaction has ended. You've won this round, but the consequences linger. That single draft, brief as it was, has shifted the mood of the house. The hallway feels bruised, like the aftermath of a quarrel. You shiver, not from cold, but from the echo of motion. You remember a tale Mrs. Brimbleton once told you over tea. Her great uncle had caught a chill during just such an event. Two doors opened. A draft struck him square across the shoulder blades, and within 3 days he'd lost the use of one arm. You suspect exaggeration. Still, it's the kind of story that makes you layer your shawls more carefully. Back upstairs, you take a moment to recalibrate the air. You crack a window for just a second, allowing the room to breathe. Not wide enough for mischief, just a respectful nod to circulation. You count to 5, then seal it again. You relight the fire, add a few coals, and place your hands near the flame. Your skin tightens with the change in temperature, but your resolve doesn't waver. You are the guardian of equilibrium. The others might not notice. The housemaid may think the pantry door doesn't matter. The stable boy likely scoffs at air drama, but the house is a system, and if even one part shifts, the consequences are never isolated. Even now, long after the draft has settled, you walk the perimeter, the blue salon, the vestibule, the morning room. You touch the corners, test the window latches, place your palm against the mantel brick to feel for changes. This is more than caution. This is housekeeping as choreography, the silent, careful dance of doors and windows, fire and cloth, human breath and architectural humors. And perhaps that's why, when the fire catches again and the curtain no longer flutters in the guest room, you feel not just relief, but pride. You've reset the house. The air is still, and that means, for now, you are safe. By late morning, the house is calm once more, at least on the surface. The sunlight, weak and watery as an oversteeped cup of tea, slants through the drawing room windows and settles on the carpet in polite, unambitious rectangles. You glance at them occasionally, watching for the telltale shimmer, the sign that air is moving when it ought not be. You've dressed appropriately for the day's work, which is to say, densely. 2 petticoats, a woolen fichu, a cap with a particularly stern lace edge. There's a satisfaction in preparing one's armor, knowing you've given cold no entry point. Today's objective is less about sealing. The house is already thoroughly stuffed and pinned and draped, and more about presentation. You're expecting company again. A visit from the Sedgwicks, who, as any self respecting hostess knows, are both painfully stylish and extremely opinionated about decor. The trouble, of course, is that fashionable interiors often run headfirst into the hard wall of draft conscious design. Take your drawing room, for instance. It was once an airy, open space. French doors, pastel walls, light muslin curtains. Charming, elegant, utterly impractical. You nearly froze to death in it during your second winter in the house. Now it's been transformed into a fortress of warmth. Heavily draped windows, dense Turkish rugs layered like pastry on the floor, bookcases pulled strategically across the more suspicious wall joints, and furniture arranged in a deliberate cluster around the hearth. The central focus is no longer the windows or the piano, it's the fire. This fashionably draft proof layout has its drawbacks, of course. There's less room to circulate. Guests often trip over the hearth screen. One aunt famously got momentarily stuck between a side table and the footstool when attempting to reach her shawl. But it works. The room is warm. The air is still. The fire glows with the confidence of an accomplished host. Still, you feel the pang of awareness. The Sedgwicks will have opinions. They always do. Last time, Mrs. Sedgwick called your sideboard suspiciously solid, which may or may not have been a veiled insult about its role in blocking off a known floor draft. Today, you're ready. You've even placed a stack of magazines near the draftiest corner, not to be read, but to act as a passive air buffer. They're angled just so, appearing artful but deeply strategic. Your footman enters to report their carriage is near. You nod and rise. The battle begins anew. They arrive in a flourish of fur trim and suppressed judgment. Mr. Sedgwick lingers too long in the entryway. Of course he does, forcing the inner door to remain open for a few soul withering seconds longer than necessary. You suppress a wince. The portiere shivers. Mrs. Sedgwick enters with that particular glance that appraises a room not for beauty, but for trend adherence. Her gaze lands on your heavy drapes and lingers. Ah, she says, the way one might acknowledge the presence of an unexpected tax. You lead them toward the fire. The chairs have been pre warmed with heated bricks tucked into the cushions earlier. The fire screen has been moved to accommodate taller boots. You serve tea with practiced serenity, the tray shielded by a napkin that, quite incidentally, blocks air from the vestibule. The conversation drifts from the usual small talk to interior fashion, the real battlefield. Mrs. Sedgwick mentions the latest rage in London salons, unobstructed sightlines, fewer curtains, fewer walls. She calls it refreshing. You call it chilly, but only in your head. Aloud, you nod and sip your tea. How interesting, you say, noncommittally. Then, with surgical precision, you add, we've found that certain corners of this old house respond poorly to openness. This is a coded phrase, a statement that implies both respect for the home's character and a refusal to follow trends into frostbite. Mr. Sedgwick asks if you've considered removing the fireplace altogether, replacing it with a more modern heat box, a term you suspect he invented. You smile and say, oh, but then we'd miss the pleasure of stoking a proper flame, wouldn't we? They nod, but you can see it. They do not understand. Historians still debate whether these aesthetic shifts, the movement from layered, draft proof interiors to sparse, breezy layouts, reflected changing tastes or deeper psychological shifts. Some say the rise of neoclassicism encouraged airiness. Others argue that people simply forgot how cold could be. You sip your tea and listen politely as Mrs. Sedgwick criticizes the weight of your window treatments. You do not mention the storm last week when the wind rattled those very windows like a drunk demanding entry. You do not describe how the velvet curtains, doubled with muslin, stopped the draft dead in its tracks. You simply nod again. They leave soon after. You watch the door close. You watch the flame in the candle by the vestibule. Still, no flicker. You've survived another visit. And though fashion may shift through Regency, Rococo, or whatever French inspired fantasy follows, your house remains warm, not because it's stylish, because it's defended. And you? You remain comfortably out of fashion and perfectly warm. It happens more often than you'd like to admit. You step into an unoccupied room, a familiar space, and a chill lifts the hair at the back of your neck. Not the cold kind, not the medical kind, the other kind, the kind of cold that feels like it's watching you. You are not a superstitious person. You read newspapers. You drink rational tea. You believe in the science of heat retention and good housekeeping. And yet, the ghost in the hallway has returned. It doesn't rattle chains or moan in a predictable way. It doesn't even appear at night necessarily. It's more a presence, a breeze with intent. The air in the hallway between the guest bedroom and the linen cupboard sometimes shifts in ways that defy every physical explanation you know. You're not alone in this, of course. The 1700s are full of stories, entire books, about unexplained chills and sudden drafts that were blamed on the supernatural. It's not uncommon to hear phrases like, a spirit disturbed the stillness, or an ancestor's sigh passed through the floorboards. And while most of your neighbors are more likely to blame a loose shutter or a faulty chimney flue, plenty still whisper about the dead. Take Mrs. Claypole down the road. She's utterly convinced her late husband's spirit communicates through temperature drops. It's always near the scullery, she insists. He hated that room. You nodded politely when she said it, but deep down you wondered, is it truly a draft or something more unsettling? You've had servants refuse to dust the back hallway unless the door was propped open and a hymn was playing softly nearby. One girl swore her candle was snuffed 3 times in succession, always when she passed the linen chest. You dismissed it at the time, but that was before the day you felt the cold come from inside the house. That particular afternoon, you'd been rearranging the drawing room. You opened the hall door to fetch the good footstool, and as soon as you stepped over the threshold, the air changed. A single, unmistakable stream of dorsal brushed your face, smelled faintly of damp rosewater, and then disappeared. The room was still, silent, empty. And then the fire in the drawing room sputtered, like it had caught its breath. You didn't tell anyone, not because you feared being mocked, but because you weren't entirely sure what you'd say. You've tried to find the logical source. The floorboards have been checked, the walls tapped, even the chimney in the upstairs closet was cleaned out, just in case. And yet, when the wind moves in that space, it moves like it remembers. Historians still argue whether the 18th century obsession with ghostly drafts was rooted in fear of death, lack of insulation, or a culture that found poetry in chilliness. Some suggest that ghosts became metaphors for bad design, a personified scapegoat for poorly planned hallways and insufficient caulking. But that feels like a modern idea, doesn't it? Back then, when someone complained of a cold spot, people didn't ask about the insulation. They asked about the history. Who lived here? Who died here? What unresolved grief might still be wandering through the plaster and wood grain? You're not prepared to answer those questions, but you do keep a dried lavender sachet nailed discreetly to the inside of the linen cupboard, just in case. This is also why you never leave internal doors open at night. Not because of drafts, strictly speaking, though you'll use that as your excuse, but because when the air shifts after dark, it feels personal, like it's come looking for something. Tonight, as you prepare to bank the fire and draw the curtains, you glance toward the hall door, closed, as it should be, but you feel it anyway, a slight suction of the air, as though the house has sighed in your direction. You ignore it. That's the rule. You don't acknowledge the draft. You don't speak to it. You certainly don't ask it questions. You simply tighten your shawl, adjust the drapery at the bottom of the door, and return to your armchair. But in the corner of the room, the candle flickers just slightly, not enough to move, just enough to let you know something passed. You settle deeper into your seat, hands tucked beneath the quilt on your lap, firelight bouncing softly across the polished teapot. You tell yourself it was nothing, a shift in the air, the house adjusting to the night, and perhaps it was. But just to be sure, you add a second rug beneath the door, a heavier one, the kind your great uncle claimed would stop both wind and whisper, because whatever it is, draft or something older, you'd prefer it stayed out. Daylight brings with it a kind of optimism, the idea that perhaps today the air will behave, that maybe, just maybe, the chill that haunts the eaves and flows beneath your bedroom door has grown weary of its mischief, that perhaps the house, like its occupants, craves peace, and then you step outside, only briefly, just to inspect the back garden. The air is brisk, the sky a pale milk glass dome overhead. The hedges have browned at the edges. A crow stares at you with what can only be described as editorial displeasure. You wrap your cloak tighter and head back in. The moment the kitchen door swings open, a gust of wind follows you like an uninvited guest. It slips in past your heels, curls through the scullery, and surges up the rear corridor with all the grace of an amateur actor trying to improvise. The house groans softly in response. You sigh. This is why airing out the poor is such a contradiction. You've read the pamphlets, you've heard the lectures. Among the enlightened upper classes, sealing windows and doors is a sign of taste, of refinement. But just a few streets over, in the workhouses and tenements, ventilation is the rule, not warmth, not comfort, not containment. No. For the poor, drafts are mandatory. It's a grim sort of irony. The very air you battle to exclude is enforced upon those who cannot afford to escape it. In hospitals, prisons, and schools for the indigent, windows are designed to remain open. The idea is to promote circulation, to purge illness, to keep moral decay from accumulating in stagnant rooms. There's this persistent belief that still air breeds sin, that poverty festers in unventilated spaces like mold behind wallpaper. You visited a parish run workhouse once during a charitable errand with the vicar's wife. The memory lingers. The dormitories were vast, stone floored, and open to the elements. The windows had no glass, only shutters that gaped in strange, uneven angles. The air inside was alive, a constant ripple of cold that made your nose run within moments. The matron explained proudly that no stale breath lingers here. You nodded, clutching your handkerchief and mentally composing the note you'd write later, requesting the installation of additional rugs. They'd ignore it, of course. The children there huddled together under rough blankets, their shoulders drawn up like turtles, half within their shells. A few had scarves wrapped around their faces. One boy wore two left mittens and still shivered with every breath. And yet, the belief persists. Ventilation is good for them. Not you, though. Not your drawing room, not your bedchamber. Historians still argue whether this discrepancy was driven by class, science, or plain disregard. Some point to emerging miasma theories, the idea that disease breeds in stagnant air. Others point to moral theories, that the poor needed to be aired out like musty laundry to keep their thoughts pure. Either way, the result was the same. Cold was considered therapeutic for the lower classes. It's strange, isn't it? In the same century, a duke might seal his bedroom with 5 layers of curtain and wall tapestry, while an orphan in a poorhouse was denied a pane of glass because fresh air builds character, and the language surrounding it all is maddening. You've read pamphlets titled On the Fortifying Effects of Crisp Air Amongst the Working Classes, which conveniently fail to mention how many toes are lost to frostbite. You once had a conversation with a doctor who praised the clarity of thought achieved in his morning rounds through unheated wards. When you asked if he ever suffered the ill effects himself, he looked surprised. "Oh no," he said, "I keep a fire in my office." Of course you do. You recall hearing that even in some asylums, patients were strapped to beds near open windows, not out of cruelty, but because the air was thought to correct wandering minds. Madness, it was said, could not survive a cross breeze. And yet, in your own home, madness might well be caused by one. The contradiction is never spoken aloud. The poor must breathe freely. The wealthy must breathe strategically. You return to the kitchen and ensure the door is firmly latched. The gust you brought in is long gone now, absorbed into the labyrinth of hallways. But you know it lingers somewhere, making itself at home in corners and corridors. You crouch beside the hearth and light the fire anew. A small flame catches. A curl of smoke rises. You adjust the screen. You sigh. This morning's breeze wasn't malicious, just careless, but it's a reminder that comfort is a privilege you must defend. So you rise, dust your skirts, and begin again, checking shutters, adjusting curtains, pressing your palm to the drafty spot beneath the stair. Because while others are forced to live with moving air, you have the choice and the responsibility to hold it at bay. It is Sunday morning, and with it comes a familiar blend of solemn ritual and mild discomfort. The bells begin early, echoing from the chapel tower down the lane. They ring not so much as a call to worship, but as a gentle reminder that yes, today you must venture into the coldest building in town, the parish church. Churches in 1700s England are many things: places of reflection, community gathering spots, occasional battlegrounds for hat brim etiquette, but they are not warm. You rise reluctantly, layering with the practiced precision of someone preparing for spiritual and meteorological trial: linen shift, wool petticoat, stays, underskirt, overskirt, shawl, gloves, reticule, bonnet, cape. You consider stuffing dried rosemary in your muff for fortitude. You go with dried orange peel instead, more cheerful. Outside, the air is crisp and bright, the kind of chill that feels polite at first, but reveals its teeth once you're more than 10 paces from the door. The church is only a 10-minute walk, but yes, each step closer feels like a negotiation with frost. By the time you arrive, your breath is visible, and your fingers have begun staging a quiet mutiny inside your gloves. The church doors are open, of course, wide and inviting, held there by stout iron hooks, and the general consensus that this is how it's done. Warmth, what little might have accumulated inside, is long gone. The nave is cavernous, the stone floor unforgiving. The pews are unpadded and chilled as tomb slabs. You shuffle down the aisle, nodding at fellow congregants who look equally swaddled and equally dismayed. You find your family pew, second from the front, left hand side, and settle in. The air bites through your skirt as you sit. You try not to flinch. This is your chilly pew time. Every household prepares for church differently. Some bring warmed stones wrapped in flannel. Others tuck pew cushions under one arm like military rations. A few less dignified families even arrive with foot warmers, discreet, portable braziers filled with coals. You have considered this, but the idea of a stray ember igniting your hem keeps you conservative, and so you suffer. The vicar begins the opening prayer, his breath forming clouds as he speaks. The organ wheezes to life, noble but frigid. You can hear someone behind you sniffle once, twice. Someone in the front has brought a muff large enough to conceal a badger. A child whines that his feet are asleep. An older gentleman sneezes and is immediately handed a camphor-scented handkerchief by his wife, as though this were part of the order of service. Historians still debate why no one ever heeded these churches. Was it piety, poverty, structural impracticality? Theories abound. One explanation is spiritual, the belief that physical discomfort aided devotion, that suffering through an icy sermon built character, that shivering brought one closer to God. The Lord, presumably, would warm you internally. Another explanation is practical. Churches were large, poorly sealed, and made entirely of materials that seem specifically chosen to repel warmth. Heating such a space with any real efficacy would have required enough coal to light an industrial forge, not exactly sustainable for a village with 5 bakers and 1 pig. There were attempts. You've heard of stoves being installed near the altar, squat iron things with suspicious pipes that clanged and rattled through the homily, but these were rare and controversial. Some congregants claimed the smell of burning metal distracted them from the Psalms. One of your great aunts claimed that drafts in church were that divinely administered, that at each chill along the back of the neck was the Lord's reminder to sit up straight. You suspect she also liked the dramatic flair of fainting gently onto her prayer book during the colder services. You do your best to keep warm, hands clasped tight, feet tucked beneath your skirts, posture high to minimize exposure. But the cold seeps in through every crack in the stone, rising through the pew like a second sermon. Even the candles seem to flicker reluctantly. The wax is sluggish, the flame stingy. The vicar's voice drones on about humility. You think longingly of your hearth. You think longingly of your tea. You think longingly of not being here. Then, finally, the final prayer. You rise, bow your head, shuffle out with the rest of the congregation, a quiet, hunched procession of people too chilled to gossip. Back in the daylight, the cold feels less cruel. Movement brings a little heat. You walk briskly, faster than decorum might suggest, and when you reach your doorstep, you barely let the servant open the door before slipping through like a fox pursued. The house is warm, wonderfully warm. You peel off your outer layers one by one, dropping them like defensive armor: gloves, shawl, bonnet, cape. Your fingers are numb, your nose is scarlet, your boots leave damp half moons on the rug. You go straight to the parlor, where the fire has been stoked and your slippers rest near the fender. You fall into your chair and exhale so deeply it feels like the first breath you've taken all day. Church has left you spiritually renewed and thermally traumatized. Still, you're grateful. Grateful for walls that hold heat. Grateful for curtains that block wind. Grateful for the little brass key in your pocket, the one that locks the window behind the chaise. Because next week you'll go again. You'll sit on that pew, cold and pious. But today you are warm, and that feels holy enough. The afternoon after church is always the same: quiet, inward, and slightly overcooked. Everyone's moving a little more slowly. The cold has worked its way into joints and tempers alike. Even the coals in the kitchen seem sluggish, reluctant to rouse themselves after the morning's labor. You sit in the drawing room, a shawl across your shoulders and a teacup balanced in your lap. It's warm, but not hot, comfortably tepid, like your enthusiasm for visitors on Sundays. And then it happens. A knock. You glance up, startled, slightly betrayed by the universe. It's early for callers. You had hoped for one of those quiet winter afternoons when the only conversation is the sound of spoons tapping porcelain. But no, there it is again, that dainty, deliberate tap, tap, tap. You sigh, rise, and gesture toward the maid. See who it is, please, and mind the door. You say it like a prayer, a hope, a desperate whisper against what you already know is about to go horribly wrong. The front door opens, just a little too long. The wind, patient and opportunistic, seizes the chance. It flows into the entryway, curls around the hall tree, and reaches into the drawing room with chilling confidence. Your teacup rattles. Someone has created a hysteria in the drawing room. Mrs. Pelham enters first, followed closely by her sister and what appears to be a basket of knitted items wrapped in taffeta. You barely register their greetings. Your eyes are on the candle flame, which flickers dangerously. The curtain stirs. The fire emits a hiss of protest. You rise, nod, smile, and immediately begin sealing the breach. So lovely to see you, you murmur, moving not toward your guests, but toward the portiere. You grip its edge and swing it closed behind them with the grace of a footman trained by monks. But it's too late. The damage is done. Mrs. Pelham, of course, notices nothing. She's already unwrapping her scarf, which she drapes over the arm of the settee with scandalous nonchalance. Her sister plops down into the corner chair, the cold chair, the one near the window that no one should sit in without first performing 3 preparatory rituals and at least 1 warm compress. You suppress a shiver. The conversation begins. It meanders from church attire to embroidery floss shortages to a curious dispute over a neighbor's prized marrow. But beneath it all, you sense it, the breeze. It swirls subtly around your ankles. It tugs softly at your sleeve. It tickles the back of your neck in a way that feels altogether too familiar. You offer tea, hoping the ritual will act as a distraction. While pouring, you angle your body so that you can scan the room without appearing rude. Your eyes catch it. The problem. The maid, bless her, has left the inner door to the dining room cracked open, which means that when the front door opened, a tunnel of air was created, a perfect wind corridor slicing through your carefully curated stillness. And this is what creates parlor panic. Not just the discomfort, though that's bad enough, but the ripple effect. The way one fluttering curtain can unravel the emotional equilibrium of the entire room. You see it now. Mrs. Pelham crosses her arms tightly. Her sister shifts in her chair, glancing downward. Someone mentions a headache. You hand over a scone with just a little more force than necessary. Historians still argue whether this heightened sensitivity to airflow was psychosomatic or whether people in the 1700s were simply more attuned to small environmental shifts. You have no doubt it's real. You've lived it. A sudden draft can end a conversation. It can derail a tea. It can start a family argument, inspire a poem, or, as once happened during a luncheon in Bath, cause an entire table of ladies to simultaneously clutch their shawls and begin quoting Psalm 23. You rise and excuse yourself. Just seeing to something, you murmur, already halfway to the dining room. You shut the door firmly, pressing your palm against the cool wood until the air stops shifting. You return, sit, and smile as if nothing has happened. The fire begins to behave again. The flame steadies. Mrs. Pelham's sister removes a glove. You relax your shoulders. The world is right once more. Conversation resumes, slightly more animated now. The hysteria passes like a fever, acknowledged but unspoken. And yet, you'll remember it. Later, when you write your letter to your cousin, you'll describe it in detail: the movement of the air, the betrayal of the door, the moment the curtain lifted like a warning. Because in this house, in this age, air is not neutral. It is either managed or it is dangerous. And today, for a few harrowing minutes, you lost control. But you rallied, you acted, you closed the door. And now, once again, the drawing room is yours. You've just settled back into the armchair, cheeks flushed not from warmth, but from the lingering embarrassment of nearly losing your drawing room to chaos when it hits you, a passing thought, soft and oddly thrilling. What if they're right? What if the physicians of the New Age, those curly-wigged contrarians in London salons, are on to something? You think of Dr. Halloway, who visited last spring with a pamphlet under one arm and a mild, suspiciously persistent smile. He had spoken of air renewal and atmospheric rejuvenation as if they were the keys to human enlightenment. He said things like oxygen and ventilation with the kind of reverence usually reserved for scripture. At the time, you'd nodded politely and offered him a biscuit. But still, the idea lingers. What if drafts weren't always his enemies? What if, in carefully measured doses, under supervision, with firm expectations, and perhaps a friendly windscreen, air could be beneficial? The thought is absurd, of course. You've seen what unregulated air can do. You've felt its icy fingers twist through the gaps in the nursery floorboards. You've watched shawled matrons collapse under the weight of a breeze. And yet, there's talk in town of a new movement, the fresh air set, a group of Enlightenment thinkers who believe that nature, fresh, wild, moving nature, should be embraced, not feared. They advocate open windows, light clothing, morning walks in damp grass. One gentleman was seen picnicking beside a lake in February. He is, naturally, dead now, but that hasn't stopped the movement. You even heard that in London, some homes have begun to open their windows deliberately in the morning hours, not to air out a particular smell or cook fume, but as a daily ritual, a reset, a welcome to the day. Historians still argue whether this change in attitude marked a real improvement in public health or just an uptick in theatrical fainting. Some praise the transition toward ventilation as a breakthrough. Others note that tuberculosis surged at about the same time. You're skeptical, and yet you remember something strange from your childhood. You were 9. The house was being painted, and you were forced to sleep in the attic room for a week. There were no curtains up there, and the sash window didn't shut properly. The wind blew constantly. The moon poured in like milk. It should have been miserable, and yet you slept better that week than you had in years. You tell yourself it was the novelty, or perhaps the cleaner air away from the coal smoke of the parlor, but the memory has never left. You shake the thought away. It's easier to dismiss these new ideas when you remember the chaos they invite. Dr. Holloway, for instance, once claimed that allowing fresh air into sick rooms prevented nervous disturbances. Yet 3 days after airing out the vicar's drawing room, his wife came down with a mysterious fever that lasted all of Lent. Coincidence? Possibly. You prefer to think not. Even so, the debate continues. And it's not just physicians anymore. Architects are joining the fray. Some of the newer houses being built outside town have internal air ducts, little holes in the walls that invite airflow through controlled channels. It's practically heretical, a draft by design. You imagine trying to explain this to your grandmother. She once hung blankets across the inside of windows during the summer for fear that evening air might slip in and sour the milk. And now people are inviting the breeze to come and go as it pleases. You glance at your own window. It's latched as always, curtains drawn, a fulled towel at the base for good measure. Still you rise, approach it, pull back the drape. The garden glistens in weak afternoon light. The trees don't move, not visibly, but you can feel the weight of the sky pressing gently against the glass. The air outside doesn't look malicious today, just uninvited. You rest your hand on the latch, just for a second, just to feel the idea. You don't open it. Of course not. That would be ridiculous. Instead, you let your fingers rest there a moment longer, then step back and draw the curtain again as if nothing had happened. Because today, the air is calm, and so are you. But the question remains, lodged somewhere behind your practical mind like a pebble in a shoe. What if they're right? The question won't go away. Even as you go about your afternoon, supervising the silver polish, inspecting the preserves in the pantry, frowning gently at the uneven way the table linens have been folded. The idea trails behind you like a stray ribbon caught on your hem. What if fresh air really is good? It's a rebellious thought, one that hums through your mind in defiance of decades of tightly sealed rooms, bundled ankles, and bedtime shawls. You try to push it aside, but every small movement seems to invite the breeze back into your imagination. Later that day, you overhear a conversation in the garden between Agnes and the cook's cousin, who's been visiting from the next village over. He's one of those bold, hatless types who never seems to feel the cold and thinks milk is a cure all for melancholy. I sleep with the window open a crack, he boasts, tugging on a boot. Best lungs in the parish. Agnes makes a polite, strangled sound that could be agreement or horror. You, standing just out of view, experience a shudder so instinctual it feels ancestral. Sleeping with the window open in April? That's madness. That's bravery. That's something you would never, ever do, probably. You spend the rest of the day revisiting your home with new eyes. Not the eyes of a careful Georgian hostess, but those of a possible, very cautious convert. You begin in the morning room, which has always been problematic. The window sticks in its frame. The fireplace draws poorly. The ceiling is too high for proper heating, but it gets the best light. You sit there sometimes with mending or a novel, tucked in a quilt, watching the curtain twitch when the door opens too briskly. What would happen if you opened the window on purpose? Just slightly, not for long, just enough to renew the air, as Dr. Holloway would say, with his breath that smells faintly of root vegetables and confidence. You run your hand along the frame. Dust, cobweb, that oddly sticky feeling of a latch that hasn't moved since Cromwell. You don't open it, but the idea stands there next to you, arms crossed. Later, during supper, the debate emerges aloud. Your cousin Eustace has come to call, and somehow the conversation drifts toward ventilation. He mentions casually that a friend in London has had the entire back of his house refitted with air tubes. Air tubes? You repeat, chewing slowly. Yes, Eustace says, warming to the topic. Channels behind the walls, allowing natural flow. It's the future. Apparently, the physician who designed them also works with racing horses. Charming, you say, sipping soup. Did he install any heating while he was at it? Or are the tubes expected to do that too? Eustace chuckles. You're skeptical. I'm practical. Are you, or just reluctant? You pause. It's a good question, one you don't answer. After dinner, you wander the house once more. The air feels still, heavy almost. You crack a door just to observe what happens. Nothing. No rush of wind, no sudden reordering of molecules. Just stillness disturbed. You light a candle, place it on a table by the west wall, watch it. Steady. Then you open a drawer in the next room. A minor movement of air. The flame leans ever so slightly. You close the drawer. The flame rights itself. It's mesmerizing. This, this tiny air war is always happening, isn't it? Behind walls, under doors, around floorboards, movement and resistance, push and pull, and you, like a silent general, have spent years commanding it without ever seeing the full map. You remember arguments you've had, quiet, frosty standoffs with guests or servants who dared to open something they shouldn't. One window cracked open, and the entire household turns into a civil war of preference. Your uncle once stayed the week and slept with a bootjack propped in his window to let in the night air. He claimed it improved his complexion. He also developed a barking cough. Coincidence? Unclear, but you've never let it happen again. There's a story about Lady Fairburn and her famous air battle with her husband. He wanted the window open, she wanted it shut. The compromise was a lace curtain, pinned halfway up and heavily weighted at the bottom. The staff referred to it as the Treaty of the Drawing Room. You're not sure who won. Historians might look back on this era and wonder why air was such a source of contention, why homes turned into wind fortresses, why families became obsessed with sealing and stuffing and adjusting. They'll write long, scholarly tomes about the psychology of draft management. They'll say it was about control, about class, about insulation, technology, and the myths of miasma. They won't say this. Sometimes it's just about comfort, and sometimes comfort is more complicated than it seems. You go to bed that night feeling uncertain. You press your hand against the shutters before drawing the curtains. The wood is cool, familiar. You do not open them, but you consider it. You lie in bed, tucked into your warm nest of sheets and flannel, and for the first time in years, you imagine what it would be like to sleep with the air moving gently across your face. It seems not terrifying, just oddly brave. The morning after your quiet rebellion of thought arrives without fanfare. No mysterious illness, no creeping paralysis. Your lungs rise and fall as usual, and the floorboards beneath your slippers offer the same polite groan they always do. You almost laugh, almost, because deep down you expected something. Surely, even considering letting in a draft, even entertaining the idea, would have consequences. Some ancestral curse, a sudden cramp, perhaps a stern letter from your grandmother's portrait, but the house is still, unbothered, and that, in itself, feels strange. You go about your morning routine in the usual rhythm: fire first, then water, then the absurdly delicate task of inspecting the window panes for moisture. The parlor passes inspection, so does the drawing room. But the study, the study betrays you. One corner pane is beaded with condensation, not dangerous in itself, but an invitation, a signal that air is not flowing. And for the first time, instead of reaching for the towel, you pause. You open the window, not dramatically, not fully, just a 2-inch slide upward, enough to feel the sudden inrush of morning air, crisp, damp, touched with chimney smoke and distant bread. You hold your breath. The flame in the candle flickers slightly, then steadies. The drape tugs softly against the frame. A breeze, yes, but not a malicious one. And for just a moment, the air feels alive. You close it again, quickly. Let's not be absurd, but you feel it. A change, slight but undeniable. The house has breathed by mid-morning. You find yourself thinking about the other openings in your life, metaphorical and literal, the tiny, cumulative air wars you fought over the years. Some you won, some were lost in a silent truce, sealed behind curtains and brass fire screens. There was the infamous window crack scandal during your cousin's birthday supper. A guest, emboldened by wine and enthusiasm, opened the dining room sash just wide enough to invite catastrophe. Napkins fluttered. Aunt Leonora had a mild nosebleed. You banned him for a year. He sent a poem in apology. Or the fireplace draft argument with your great Aunt Madeline, who insisted that the chimney's persistent wheeze was just the house sighing. You spent 3 days blocking it with lavender stuffed pillows. She spent 3 more removing them while humming hymns. And let's not forget the famous cross draft incident of 1768, when the back door and the scullery window were opened simultaneously. The resulting breeze lifted the parlor carpet 3 inches into the air. The dog refused to go near that room for weeks. Historians may never document these battles, but in the minds of every English household, they live on. Each home had its own rules, of course. Some families favored overcompensation, layers upon layers, windows painted shut, rooms that smelled faintly of coal, stale biscuits, and old arguments. Others practiced a kind of passive resistance, accepting the occasional breeze as the price of not descending into complete paranoia. You've always seen yourself as the reasonable sort, practical, balanced. But as you sit down with your late morning tea, steam rising gently, spoon resting against the saucer in an elegant, familiar lean, you admit something to yourself. You've gone to war with air. For years, you've treated drafts like burglars, cunning, invisible, and always just outside the door. You've invented rituals, built fabric fortresses, learned to spot a flickering candle like a detective spots lies. And now, you're starting to wonder if the breeze, at least sometimes, is just a breeze. You wouldn't tell anyone, of course. Certainly not Mrs. Pelham, who'd report your lapse to the entire ladies' society in under half an hour. Not your cousin, who still wraps the piano stool legs in rabbit wool to prevent acoustic drafts. Not even Agnes, whose loyalty is unwavering, but whose gasp at a cracked window could wake the dead. But still, the thought lingers. What if some movement of air isn't danger, but dialogue? The house responding, shifting, breathing with you rather than against. What if you've spent 30 years sealing a life that was never truly under threat? You sip your tea. The steam curls upward, unaffected. The room is still. The curtain does not move, but your thoughts do, and perhaps that's enough for now. It's the end of the day, not quite evening, not quite night, but that drowsy in-between hour where candlelight starts to make more sense than sunlight, and teacups are replaced with something slightly stronger. The sky, out the dining room window, is the color of old pewter. You're alone now. Everyone has gone. Agnes is finishing up downstairs. The cat is curled like a smug croissant on the hearth. The house is quiet. And you're making the rounds one final time, not out of paranoia, not out of habit, really, out of respect. You begin, as always, with the vestibule. The draft excluder is in place. The latch is firm. No flickers on the candle stub by the umbrella stand. You nod, press your hand once to the wood, and move on. In the blue salon, the armchair has slipped forward half an inch. You nudge it back into place with your toe. The curtains are drawn, the shutters latched. You do not need to test the window. It's never betrayed you. The drawing room is still, not just quiet, but hushed. The kind of stillness that feels earned, like a library or the inside of a pocket watch. The fire is low, glowing rather than blazing. You poke it once, not because it needs it, but because you like the sound. The parlor has one rogue breeze tonight, just a trace, but it brushes your wrist like a curious fingertip. You check the portiere, not quite closed. You sigh and pull it tight, letting the fabric fall into place like the last line of a poem. And then the guest bedroom, your favorite. Not because of the view or the color scheme, but because it is the final battlefield. The one room that never quite gave up the fight. The one window that rattled no matter what. Tonight, it's silent. You step in. You stand there a moment. You smile, because tonight the air does not move, not forward, not sideways. It simply is. You sit on the edge of the bed, not because you're tired, but because this room deserves company. You glance at the heavy drapes, the sealed window panes, the lovingly excessive pile of wool blankets. You've defended this space for decades, and tonight, for the first time, you don't feel at war. You feel at peace. And that peace is not the absence of movement, but the presence of understanding. You know now that the house will breathe, whether you let it or not, that a gust of air may not be a threat, and a still room isn't always a safe one, that every flicker, every rustle, every whisper in the curtains isn't sabotage. Sometimes it's just the weather reminding you that you live inside something alive. You stand, take one last look, and switch off the lamp. The hallway greets you with the faint scent of soot and lavender. The banister is warm from the day's touch. You ascend. In your room, the bed is waiting, a nest of linen and shadow and promise. You remove your shawl, loosen the day's buttons, and let your slippers rest neatly under the chaise. And then, just before you draw the bed curtains closed, you pause. You walk to the window. You unlatch it, just a crack. The air that slips in is cool, barely there, but it carries a whisper of something outside, damp stone, earth, a distant chimney. You leave it. You crawl into bed, letting the chill meet you, not as an enemy, as a guest. You lie beneath the blankets, head against the pillow, eyes half lidded, the room slowly fading into that gentle haze between thought and dream. The house no longer creaks. It exhales, long, quiet even. Outside, the wind rustles faintly against the hedgerows, but inside, all is calm. You hear the faint tick of the mantel clock, the soft shift of the fire's final breath. Your breath joins it, slow, easy. The worries about gaps, shutters, and candle flickers seem smaller now, softened like corners rounded by time. You've done what you can. The house is quiet, not because it's perfectly sealed, but because you are no longer afraid of its whispers. The draft may come, or it may not. The windows may hum a little. The hallway may sigh. But tonight, it is no longer a warning, just a sound, just air. Your eyelids flutter, your hands rest light across your middle. You feel the warmth of the blankets pressing gently in all the right places, the cool of the pillow balanced perfectly against your cheek. And so you let go. Let the fire fade. Let the curtain drift. Let the house breathe and let yourself drift with it. Not sealed to the sky, but safe. Not fighting the air, just floating in it. Good night.